בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל, אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל, שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל, לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Zawsze blidy bramy kuli, żeby na wybory Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 940 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again as we have big news that Israel might attack Lebanon very soon, and also Russian losses are mounting as Ukrainian forces continue to advance. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, including the ongoing war in Ukraine and also the ongoing rising situation within the Middle East, as we've gotten statements today from the Israeli command that the entirety of the senior Hezbollah command staff within southern Lebanon were killed in an airstrike last night. We have also heard statements by the Israelis that there will be no peaceful resolution that they can find at the moment to this rising problem in between them and the Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon, and are once again moving towards actual physical violent actions against Hezbollah forces and Iranian proxies within the region to be able to put down this proxy war once and for all. We have also gotten some very interesting news and somewhat concerning news that U.S. forces at the Al-Asad airbase within the Republic of Iraq have been attacked overnight, although no reports on casualties or any fatalities have been reported at this moment. Quite fortunately, although that may change, as usually 48 hours is given before any casualty updates or casualty reports are given to the general public here in the United States. At the exact same time, we've also been able to hear that inside of the Russian Federation, we've gotten more additional footage of the attack on the Torpets ammunition depot overnight, showing that the severity of the explosion was wildly understated, and in fact, it almost seemed like a nuclear explosion from the nearby town of Torpets. We were also able to see that Ramzan Kadyrov and his Chechen forces have been able to bring in more Cybertrucks from Tesla to be able to use in their armed forces. This comes at the exact same time that Ramzan Artem Kadyrov made a statement saying that Elon Musk had personally shut off access to his own Cybertruck, and that Cybertruck is no longer usable. And this may suggest that all Cybertrucks may be deactivated that are inside the Russian Federation before long. At the exact same time, we have also been able to hear that inside of the Kursk Oblast, Ukrainian forces have continued to be able to make ground around the area of Veselo on the march northwards towards the city of Glishkovo, and are continuing to drive a wedge in the remaining brigade that is south of the Reka Seym that has been trying to defend this area quite significantly for some time. We have been able to note that there have been minor Ukrainian losses in this area, but at the same time, it does appear that Ukrainian forces are continuing to make ground and will be able to achieve their strategic objectives of splitting this area into two and also cutting off the Russian river access near to the area of Glishkovo. At the same time, we've also been able to note that a higher amount of Russian tanks and armored vehicles that are being moved into the area to reinforce the now partially depleted units currently conducting the defense are being destroyed in transit, showing that the Russians once again have a very loose control over the area, and while they've been able to partially contain the Ukrainian offensive at the moment, it is a bit of an uncertain containment and may be breached at any given moment in the future if the Ukrainians start to focalize their efforts on any one single point. Meanwhile, inside of the actual state of Ukraine, we've been able to see that Russian offensive actions in this area have resulted in absolutely no gains over the past 24 hours, with a large amount of Russian losses being amalgamated, and at the same time, the Ukrainians holding a very effective and strong defensive and making sure that Russian forces are not able to gain any significant ground without taking incredibly high losses in the meantime. We have absolutely loads of news to cover tonight, and these are just some of the big talking points. We have a whole lot more to talk about on top of this, which is probably like the craziest part of the night, is that we have like a million things to be able to talk about tonight. But still, it is a very wild night, an incredibly interesting one, and we're going to be moving on into probably some of the more important news in the Ukraine war at the moment, which is the Russian defeat that we're starting to see truly coalescing south of the Reka Seym within this area. We have been able to see that Ukrainian forces have continued to advance in this area around Veselo using some incredibly modern equipment. We were able to note that CV-90s and Leopard 2s were being used in the offensives around Veselo, seen right here. You can actually see the CV-90 leading the charge across this field outside of Veselo, and we can also see a Leopard 2A6. Oh, actually, that is once again the CV-90, but we can see the Leopard 2A6 right there, providing fire support for the Ukrainian infantry that is beginning to rapidly encircle the town of Veselo and is beginning to move northwards towards the town of Glishkovo, right along the river of the Reka Seym. We can also see the CV-90 moving away from the Leopard 2 and on forward into the fields right there. We believe that they may have dismounted infantry further back. We can now see the CV-90 firing as it advances through the field on the Russian forces near to the area of the town, as it now stops, and now it does start to dismount its troops. This is a very interesting force that is being used in this area, considering that Leopard 2A6s and CV-90s are being used simultaneously. We also see that the CV-90 took a small hit right there, but appears to still be functioning and on the move. We can also see that it took
got a quick audio snippet of the cafeteria in the Russian room, apparently.
Yeah, someone said, more pigs now, please. And then they clipped to the next video. And we can see a martyr there that appears to have been abandoned, and the CV-90, which is holding a position on the road at the end of the clip. But that is the end of the video, but still showing some of the offensive elements that are ongoing in this area, as it appears that the Ukrainians do actually have a pretty substantial gain on the Russians in this area and will be able to advance further on up the road. From what we understand, these videos were being filmed just to the eastern side of Veselo. We do know that the geolocation doesn't really matter for these clips, as the actual video source for that snippet that we just saw actually came from the Russians. So if they did not know where they were, they certainly knew where they were after they filmed it with their own drone and then published it online. So the operational security side of things isn't really paramount in this particular instance. But here on the eastern flank of Veselo is the larger roadway, or the paved roadway, that travels from Veselo and all the way up to Glishkovo. This means that at the farthest, Ukrainian forces are only about 3 miles away from the south of Glishkovo, which is the closest that they have gotten so far to actually fighting within the town of Glishkovo and cutting off the Russians' river access access to the other side, pretty much severing the entire brigade that is stuck on the southern side of this river from any reinforcements or supplies from the northern side, pretty much dooming them to a end of the war that's going to be a little bit early for them, or they're either completely destroyed or a large amount of them end up surrendering to Ukrainian forces. We did get to see, however, that unfortunately some sort of a lucky hit was made today by the Russians on one of these Leopard 2s, as we did see the one Leopard 2 apparently got hit significantly enough. The crew bailed out, but the tank did begin to brew up and then finally brewed up completely in this clip, which we can see right here. We can confirm that this is a Leopard 2A6. Once again, the armor layout on the front of the turret is indicative of a Leopard 2A5, a Leopard 2A6, or a Leopard 2A7, but we know that this is a Leopard 2A6, but it actually has the elongated 120mm Rheinmetall main gun, which is a very telltale trait of a Leopard 2A6 versus a Leopard 2A5. We can see right here the vehicle was already beginning to brew up, and we saw later on that the ammo finally did start to burn inside the vehicle from the blowout panels, which were most likely left open when the crew bailed out, or may have ended up being breached by the fire that was starting to occur in the crew compartment and eventually burned out. The tank still did its job and was able to protect the crew. However, the vehicle will most likely be written off as a complete loss by the Ukrainians, which is a little unfortunate. But at the same time, this tank sacrifice is a part of a larger offensive campaign and a larger offensive objective within this area of the Russian Federation. If the Ukrainians can continue to drive their offensive from Veselo towards Glishkovo, they will be able to split this southern area into two, meaning that the brigade in this area, unless if they're able to consolidate, will actually be split in terms of combat power, and several battalions will be stuck on the eastern side, and really the eastern pocket, and some of them will also be stuck on the western pocket, meaning that the Ukrainians will be able to isolate these forces and destroy them in detail, which is a very significant part of any kind of modern battle doctrine, meaning that the Ukrainians will have a massive advantage in this area if this battle plan is implemented properly. Another important thing that will be coming out of this offensive is that the Ukrainians will be able to take the town of Glishkovo. And the town of Glishkovo, while not being a major logistical hub or a major strategic target like the city of Kursk itself, Glishkovo is a strategic target, at least in concerns to this flank. Zavano is also somewhat similar, but Glishkovo is the main priority, as this is where most Russian pontoon crossings exist or have existed in the area, and not only that, we believe that this is the area of the river that is easiest to access and set up further pontoon bridges for the Russians to be able to cross and try and reinforce or resupply the brigade that is on the southern side of this river, and that has been proven time and time again that the analysis is correct on that regard, because the Russians have continued to use this area to set up further and further pontoon bridges in support of their offensive objectives, or really defensive objectives, in this region. This is leading us to believe that the Ukrainians most likely will be able to jeopardize Glishkovo significantly enough that the Russians will not be able to use this area for any kind of pontoon bridges or any kind of abilities to ford the river and help to reinforce their brigade that is trapped on the southern side, and this will end up being a very positive outcome for the Ukrainian armed forces, and hopefully we'll get to see that the Ukrainians are able to accomplish this offensive objective within the next 2 to 3 weeks, as time is always going to be a bit of a premium when speaking on offensive objectives like this one. But nevertheless, we have been able to hear something else that's been fairly interesting about the Russian Federation, and another thing that kind of has to do with what happened up north. Now, many people know that the Toropets ammunition depot ended up blowing up about a day ago or so, and it was a pretty significant explosion. Some have said it was close to being nuclear. According to reports on the sheer volume of ammunition in the depot, the amount of explosive mass in terms of tonnage may have actually been bigger than the Hiroshima explosion, although it didn't all go up at a single time. So not really like one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions ever made, but at least in terms of the overall tonnage of explosives that blew up, in overall tonnage, it actually was technically bigger than Hiroshima, just to give you all an idea of how big this loss was of ammunition for the Russians. We've even heard some NATO analysts inside of NATO armed forces throughout Europe claim that this actually cost the Russians about 3 entire months of munitions in this single explosion at Toropets, which is a pretty significant loss. And once again, kind of laying out what I was saying yesterday, which is that while this isn't all of the Russian ammunition, it's a very significant loss to have in a singular moment, in a singular event. But we also got to see something really interesting as well. We actually got to see the panic that unfolded in Toropets when the first explosion happened in the middle of the night. So here is the clip.
Damn.
Another fun time.
Pandemonium as you'd expect. But to be honest though, with like the size of that explosion also like causing an earthquake basically, I think that's actually a reasonable response to that.
Yeah, honestly, man, it's like Krakatoa blowing up right next to your house. It's like, I don't think I would be like, oh dang, look at that. I'd be like, oh my god, I'd be running for my life as well, probably. But still,
Ukraine went from hitting stuff like the little small tanks and stuff to causing literal earthquakes inside of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's something of note that the Russians have tried and tried again to actually cause real significant damage to Ukraine, and in some instances they've caused some pretty decent damage, but then the Ukrainians just go and throw like a couple of $1,000 drones in mass at a Russian ammo depot and end up costing them about 3 months of munitions, end up leveling the entire base, killing and wounding hundreds of Russian service members, and not only that, causing an earthquake in the local area, and they did that with a whole bunch of scraps that they found in their garage. That is kind of a really big difference in between the Russians and the Ukrainians as far as their drone attacks are going. But this was a fairly...
Also, by the way, just an interesting question. I'm not sure if you'll notice right off the bat, but is this the first time that any like combatant has ever caused an earthquake by causing a strike like this, or has this like happened before?
That's a good question. It's not the first time because Hiroshima and Nagasaki did get registered on the Richter scale a little bit. So technically no, but as far as a non-nuclear explosion, I would say that this is probably one of the first times that an actual seismic event occurred from an explosion. Now, of course, a lot of people are going to be contradicting me on that and say that seismic events always happen when large explosions occur, like the dropping of a Moab. And that is true, but really, though, anything that is below a 2 on the Richter scale is literally not even noticeable, really. So as far as this actually being a seismic event that people could have felt a little distance away, getting close to a 3 on the Richter scale actually does cause some light vibrations. They're not incredibly strong. So this would technically be the first seismic event ever caused by a non-nuclear explosion that someone could have felt from miles away. And not only that, had their windows blown out by it. So this was a pretty big one. I mean, this was one of the biggest explosions that we've ever seen so far, which is pretty impressive in its own right. But what's even more impressive is the range. This was not really a close to Ukraine kind of a strike. This was actually deeper on into Russia. It was a whopping 300 miles. And to give you all an idea, Moscow is actually a lesser distance to the Ukrainian border than the Toropets ammunition depot. Moscow is only about 280 miles away from the Ukrainian border at its closest, meaning that this was a pretty deep range strike. This actually is about the same range that, say, a ATACMS long-range missile would be able to hit inside of Russia if the Ukrainians were able to fire one. And this has actually led the Russians to once again double down on their statements about long-range weapons being used by Ukraine that have been provided by the West. And Russian officials claim Putin would launch nuclear strikes if long-range missiles were used on the Russian Federation that were provided by Western countries. And a lot of people have been throwing in their thoughts on this kind of a topic. This isn't the first time that we've heard such strong worded language from the Russian government about such a thing. And it seems like the Russians are once again trying to wave the nuclear sword around to try and see if they can get the West to really back off of the idea of giving Ukraine approval to be able to use these missiles that are provided by the West inside the Russian Federation. And a lot of people have been weighing in on if they believe these statements or not. It's not like Putin and the Russian government are the most credible people. They've literally put out a red line on every single thing on the war, and we have broken every single red line, and nothing has really happened. There hasn't even been a noticeable escalation from what they were doing at the start of the war up till now. It's literally been status quo for about 3 years. And a lot of people seem to have very little faith in the Russian government and the validity of this statement, or really the validity of the threat, and whether it should be taken seriously or not. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about this? Are they thinking that the Russians actually are legitimately threatening some sort of a nuclear holocaust if this was to happen, or are a lot of people not really believing this at all? And what are you thinking about it as well?
So, as we all know, the threats are always flying out of Russia at pretty much all times of the day. There's always some type of threat being thrown around. And we heard from Putin about, I would say, maybe 5, 6, or 7 days ago, that if the long-range weapons were used on Russian territory by Ukraine that were given by the West, then that would put Russia at war with the Western world. We heard that from Putin himself in a press briefing, and now we're hearing that Russian officials are claiming that Putin would not only go to war with the West, but he would also launch a nuclear war in itself if the long-range missiles were used on Russia. So the question is, what are your thoughts about his newest threat? So 49% said no, that would not happen, while 31% said, probably not nuclear, but something else. And 12% said, yes, I believe he would do it, a nuclear war. And on this one, I got to say, I'm not buying this whatsoever. He would not launch a nuclear war over long-range missiles. In fact, he probably would not only not do that, he'd probably not launch a war whatsoever on the West, because he would almost certainly lose that war on any front. So that would be stupid for Putin to do that, and you'd have to basically be on the border of wanting to basically jump off a cliff if you were willing to do something like that. That would be very stupid. So I think it probably won't happen, and it probably won't be really anything if long-range missiles were used. It would probably simply be just another escalation in Ukraine and Russia's book, and that would be the end of it. Probably nothing coming out of it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say this is a red line that probably could be crossed, to be entirely honest. The threat that's now being issued is so absurd, it's insane. To threaten nuclear war, not only on Ukraine, from what I understand, if I'm correct, Matthew, this was just all-out nuclear war against everyone.
Yeah, he didn't actually say the target of the nuclear war. He just said that actually it was the Russian officials that said this, by the way. They're saying that they've spoken to Putin in private and they know through good sources that Putin would launch a nuclear war on somebody. But they didn't say if it was Ukraine, if it was NATO, if it was the West. They don't know. They don't know who they were going to launch the war on, but he's going to launch nukes at somebody if the long-range missiles are used.
I would have to say it's such an outlandish threat, it can't be real, because there is a certain kind of a threat that can be made, and an escalation up to a threat like that would make it seem plausible. Like, for example, if Russia said, if this happens, we're going to start, I don't know, hitting Ukrainian government buildings in Kyiv and trying to kill government officials. That would be a legitimate escalation. Then if they went and said, okay, if y'all do not stop now, we're going to start launching tactical nuclear weapons onto Ukrainian forces in major buildups inside the Donbass, that would be a legitimate threat, especially if they follow through with it. And then if they went and said, if y'all do not stop their usage of weapons on Russia, even after we've done all of this, we're going to start nuking y'all, we would have a legitimate reason to believe that that threat would be an actual threat, an actual, tangible, imminent threat. But at the moment, this is a completely unrealistic kind of a threat that's been put out, because there's been no escalation up to this point to get us to where this would be an actual tangible threat. And a lot of people are going to be saying, well, why does it need escalation? That doesn't make any sense. They could just nuke anyone anytime they want, and they can. But the thing is that with diplomacy and with everything, there's kind of a necessity to be about as lazy as possible as you can be, because there's a moment where people might jump off the tracks, if you know what I mean. So let me put it this way. If you're driving a car and someone is tailgating you, you don't immediately slam on your brakes, pull out a revolver, go back to that car, and blast them. Like, that would be the craziest thing to do. Usually, what you're going to do, because you're very unhappy with this person being an asshole and tailgating you, is that you're going to brake check them. And so you're going to tap the brakes really hard, really quick, to freak them out, and hopefully they back off. Because, why in the world go to slamming on the brakes and going back there and greasing them when you could just see about, tapping the brakes? Maybe that'll get them to back off. But then they don't back off. So the next thing you do is that you pretty much almost slow down to a stop on the interstate. So then that other person, they now have a choice to either back off because they're scared of what might happen next, Or they can also double down, and then they can start to actually road rage with you. And so you can kind of see the steps of escalation that I'm talking about here in a more realistic form, at least for here in America. And then if they double down and they don't back off, that's when you come to a complete stop. You get out of the car with a revolver and you go grease someone. And that is the last step of the escalation scale. That is the most severe one that you can get to in this hypothetical. And that's how diplomacy works on every single level. No one really wants to go all out to the max instantly. Usually everyone wants to kind of eke their way up towards the max escalation possible, because there's a chance that in between doing nothing and going to 100, someone might jump off the tracks and give up. And that's not what the Russians are doing right now with this threat. And also someone said, that's a bad ideology. It's just an example. I'm not saying that that's what people should normally do. Road rage is pretty stupid. But beyond that...
Actually, that road rage incident you described actually happened here in Birmingham about, I think it was 10 months ago. So when you were saying that, I was like, that would be crazy if that happened. It actually happened 10 months ago. So right here.
Yeah, it actually did. So that's why it's an example, but still, it's not something that people should be doing. But I hope y'all are getting the idea of the analogy here instead of taking the analogy literally, because that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a figurative thing, not a, like, this is what you're supposed to be doing kind of a thing. But that's not what the Russians are doing. What they're doing is that they're getting out of the car immediately and they're greasing someone, at least with this threat, and that makes absolutely no sense. They haven't tried to move up the escalatory scale at all. In fact, over the entirety of 3 years, we've never seen them move up the escalatory scale at all. Like, what they're doing now is the same intensity of what they were doing pretty much in the first opening months of the war. So, going off of that, I would say it's not really, it's not a tangible threat. This is once again another false threat. It will mean nothing. At this point, I would be assured by the insanity, the ludicrousness of this threat, that we could give the Ukrainians authorization to use these weapons and really nothing would come out of it at all. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least the best way I can, with a fairly decent analogy. I'm seeing a lot of people are getting absolutely floored by the analogy, and they're like, hey, that's not what you're supposed to do. That's obviously, I don't know if y'all are getting the analogy here. Nuclear war is something that you're not supposed to do off the bat either, or at all, really. And so that's kind of why the analogies are similar. It's absolutely insane things, like just nuking people out of the blue because you don't like something, or slamming on the brakes in your car and getting out on the highway and blasting someone behind you because you don't like that they're tailgating you. Those are both pretty crazy things to do. I feel like generally everyone kind of gets the idea, and y'all are kind of showing that that isn't really something that you're supposed to be doing, and that was the entire point of the analogy, is to explain, if you're going to do something bat crap ludicrous like that, there are certain kind of steps of escalation that you take to get to that point of doing something absolutely insane and ludicrous, instead of just skipping all the way up to the insane and ludicrous thing at the end of the line. So I hope that y'all get the analogy, or at least what I was trying to get at there, now that I kind of explained that a little bit more, or a little bit better on what the analogy was supposed to be achieving. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, because speaking of escalation and ways that the Russians are not really going along the escalatory chain, we are seeing that down in the Middle East, there's a little bit of a different thing going on. The escalatory chain has pretty much reached a fever pitch for about a couple of months at this point. And we've seen that both sides have really been at the point that they're about to start blasting each other at any given moment. And when I say blasting each other, technically they really have been blasting each other, but not directly. Of course, we're talking about the proxy war in between Iran and Israel, and we've never really seen either of them exchange major shots, at least directly, since April. We have to put out that caveat, since April, because it looked like in April this entire thing was going to kick off and actually be a full-scale war, and then for some reason, somehow, some way, it didn't turn into one, and now they've just been blasting each other's proxies, or the proxies have been trying to blast Israel, and that's just been how it's going. But beyond that, what we have seen is that the Israelis did conduct a pretty massive airstrike overnight. It was a pretty huge one, and according to the Israelis, the entire senior Hezbollah command got killed last night. And that's according to an Israeli official. And I'll read you all the exact statement that they made. The entire senior command of Hezbollah's Radwan force was eliminated in the strike, about 20 whole commanders. And that was according to an Israeli official. That was pretty freaking crazy to hear. I'm not going to lie about that. But still, I gotta say, an absolutely wonderful thing to know that the Israelis were able to smack down this entire command force for the Radwan force, and it looks as though the Israeli strike could be classified as a success, at least for the kind of decapitation attack it served to be able to knock out these commanders and make sure that things will not be as easy to coordinate or operate for the remaining Hezbollah forces that are in the region. We have also heard a statement today from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is largely Hezbollah's commanders, that due to the pager attack, Hezbollah is going to be renamed to Has No Balls, which sounds very similar to Hezbollah, but it's just a little different. But beyond that, we have been able to see that Has No Balls has been firing some rockets from southern Lebanon and into Israel, largely as a retaliation, because they have to show that although they don't physically have the balls, they metaphorically do have the balls. And we were able to see that the Iron Domes were once again at work last night, intercepting a large barrage that was fired from southern Lebanon. And we see the interceptions ongoing. We see a large amount of Iron Dome interceptors airborne at the time, showing that there's a large amount of rockets coming in.
This man's dedicated to the cameraman job.
Man, he's doing a pretty good job, I'm not gonna lie. He's actually keeping it kind of focused.
نفلا بعد نفلا بعد نفلا لا هي هتخبى هنا.
And that's the end of that clip, but still showing us that there was a decent barrage that occurred from Hezbollah forces overnight and into northern Israel. And right after that barrage was conducted, just about 3 hours later, we did get a statement from the Israeli government saying that there was absolutely no diplomatic solution to this problem. And I'll read y'all exactly what was put out on FITUX News. Israel has reached the conclusion that it won't be able to get a diplomatic solution to the situation on the northern border without going through a military escalation. This is why we have been gradually taking our gloves off and increasing our attacks against Hezbollah, according to an Israeli official. This is showing us that the Israelis, once again, like they knew months ago, know that there is no peaceful solution to this ongoing crisis in the area. We have seen so far that Hezbollah forces have largely been completely unresponsive to any kind of demands or any kind of actions that are meant to make them de-escalate. They have largely continued to conduct the same actions as they had before, and therefore escalate the matter even farther. We have also seen that the region, and at least specifically the country of Lebanon, has not been conducive at all to really kindling or trying to at least kill the flames. They've largely been kindling them. The Hezbollah forces pretty much have a semi-official or almost official role in the Lebanese government and the operations of Lebanon as a nation, and for this reason we have seen that the Lebanese government has taken no direct actions on their own to be able to quell or crush the Hezbollah forces that are within southern Lebanon. There was an
also something interesting as well. Not only has Israel come to the conclusion that there is no peaceful resolution to this, and like the enforcer said, they've known that for quite some time now, and they're just saying it out loud. But also, I've heard that the U.S. officials have finally admitted that the ceasefire deal is pretty much a dead duck. It's not going to go anywhere at this point, and it's pretty much pointless to keep trying to negotiate that. And we've been saying that for months on this channel. We've been saying that for months, but it looks like now the U.S. officials have finally woken up to that as well. So it's good to hear that maybe everyone's on the same page this time, and that might indicate the situation is a little bit different than past provocations that we've seen, because now that the U.S. knows that there's no hope, now Israel might actually do something and move on Lebanon to take care of those Hezbollah forces, or at least that's my current assessment.
And I would have to say that it does seem like the U.S. diplomats are finally screwing their heads on, because, like we've been saying, like Matthew said, we've been saying forever on this channel that there is absolutely no way that there is a peaceful resolution to this situation. The Iranians are hell-bent on knocking the Israelis down and out for good, and they conduct those actions through their proxy forces, and considering that they're proxy forces, the Iranians just tell them to keep going ham. And while the Iranians may be going all in or going all out, depending on the season, their proxy forces aren't. They're just continuing to go all in all the time against Israel and hoping to wear them down and weaken them over time. And this is something that I don't know why it took this long to figure this out. It seemed quite obvious to me, especially after the October attacks last year that ended up killing about 1,500 to 2,000 Israeli civilians in a single day, that there was really going to be no peaceful resolution to this. They are hell-bent on genocide, for the large part, against any citizen of Israel. Not just the Jews living in Israel, but really anyone in Israel. We got to see that by the attack on mjaor Shams, and how Hezbollah forces were really proud of that attack, and that attack ended up killing Israeli citizens, but none of them were Jewish, and it is showing that they're largely just hell-bent on genociding anyone living within the state of Israel, at least in my opinion. But beyond that, we are also seeing that at the exact same time that the United States is kind of coming around to this inevitable conclusion, we are seeing the clear signs that there was never a peaceful resolution in the area that we've also been seeing for months. Once again, another attack happened on the Al-Asad airbase inside of the Republic of Iraq against U.S. forces that are stationed there, and according to OSINT Defender, reports of a large attack on U.S. troops stationed at Al-Asad airbase in western Iraq, with upwards of 12 rockets having been launched at the base by Iranian-backed forces. These are not always Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces. Sometimes they are other forces that are supported by the Iranians and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but aren't necessarily under the Hezbollah or Hamas flag, or even under the IRGC flag. Sometimes these are incredibly small groups that are operating from inside of the borders of Iraq itself on the western regions, and they're firing them at the Al-Asad airbase. At the moment, we don't have exact information or intelligence to be able to tell us whose forces actually fired this attack. We do know they were Iranian-backed, but we do not know the exact name of this group or how large they are or what kind of an impact they have within the area of western Iraq, at least politically. But at this point, we are once again seeing that U.S. forces are under fire and in great jeopardy by Iranian-backed proxy forces in this region, and this once again is not making it a entirely Middle Eastern problem, it is making it an American problem. American forces are inside of the Middle East to secure our interests within the region. A lot of people say all kinds of silly things about how America shouldn't be in the Middle East at all, and that's fairly stupid, because if I remember correctly, everyone in America right now is bitching about the price of oil, which is pretty heavily tied to this region in the world. So either you can keep the oil cheap, or you can try and get it cheaper, or you can withdraw from the Middle East and let the prices soar, and also end up losing any kind of diplomatic connection or diplomatic sway that we had on the region, so that way we can produce it domestically, which would not really make that much sense going on into the long run. So going off of that, U.S. forces are in this region for a good reason, and Iran is continuing to make sure that their proxy forces don't just target Israel alone to make it look like it's just an Iranian-Israeli affair. They always end up going after and killing American service members that are currently in the region because they can, and because this isn't just an anti-Israeli affair, this is an anti-American and an anti-Western affair, and this is something that has to be importantly remembered by everyone that's talking about this area. This is something that does directly deal with the United States. Not only are our forces under attack in the area, most importantly, our interests, which those armed forces are there for, is under attack in this area. Iran is attempting to uproot and throw out any kind of American influence or any kind of American objectives that we have in this area through attacking the state of Israel. Their attacks aren't just targeted against the Israelis, they are targeted against the Saudi Arabians inside of the Houthi-controlled areas of Western Yemen, where they continuously have to end up fighting a war against those forces because they are trying to make sure to knock out the Saudi Arabians, which are also within the American sphere. They are targeting and attacking any kind of commercial shipping they can through the area of the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, because once again, it is about an anti-Western front. It's not an anti-Israeli front, it's anti-Western. And anyone who's listening to the message that there is some sort of a a little chasm, a microcosm that's going on in between Iran and Israel, where it's just them are drinking the Kool-Aid. That makes no sense. Everything that the Iranians do shows that Israel is just the crux of the problem. It's the beginning of the Mein Kampf. We just need to take the Sudetenland from the Czechoslovakians, and then by next year they're going to be invading Poland. This is about the same thing. Once the Iranians end up taking out Israel, if they did, they're going to be moving on to Saudi Arabia, and they're going to be moving on to the Kingdom of Jordan, and they're going to be moving on against Iraq and the SDF in northern Syria. They're going to knock out the UAE if they can, or at least put heavy pressure on them to come to the Iranian side. They are going to push us entirely out of the region, and it's very important to understand that and know that that is the end goal. It's not a small issue going on in this area. It is one that affects the entire Western world. And a lot of people, considering that point, are starting to really talk about what's happening with Israel, because it seems like a small issue, but when you put it into the big picture, this is actually a small part of a very major issue in this area. And a lot of U.S. officials have postponed trips to Israel amidst rising tensions with Hezbollah. And a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts about this tonight, and some people are saying it's about to happen. Israel is going to go to war with Lebanon and invade the southern region of their country. Others are saying only time will tell. Some or others are saying that it's just the usual provocations and it's nothing too big, probably just taking a precaution, making sure not to go over there when things seem somewhat hot. And some are a little bit unsure and undecided about this. But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well? Do you think that war is coming, or do you think this is more so the normal ebb and flow of the area?
So we have heard for a fact that U.S. officials, specifically the Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, has postponed his trip to Israel amidst the rising tensions with Hezbollah, or at least that's the publicized reason. They're saying that they're not going there because there's current escalations happening and it could be dangerous, or it could be maybe because they realize that the negotiations are pretty much pointless and showing up isn't really going to do anything. So what are your thoughts? 61% said it's about to happen, the Israeli war, while 17% said it's just the usual provocations, and 16% said only time will tell. And on this one, I gotta say, I have a feeling that the U.S. officials are sort of trying to brush over the main point here, which is they sort of misjudged the situation by thinking the ceasefire deal actually had some merit behind it. It really never had any steam to really go with it, because neither side was really willing to actually negotiate, especially the bad side here. I can't say the T word because YouTube doesn't like that. The bad side didn't want to negotiate, the proxy forces. They didn't want to negotiate in good faith. So the U.S. kind of like tried to play that down for a while, like maybe they might, but you never negotiate with proxy forces, ever. You just don't do that. And the U.S. officials have probably come to that realization at this point, which is why they postponed the trip. So I think that only time will tell, but I'm leaning toward the side that maybe something is about to happen, since U.S. officials have backed off of their ceasefire demands. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, war is probably coming around the corner. War is inevitable in this region. It's only a matter of when, and we don't really know how much external pressure is still being put into the region to stop a war from breaking out, but a war has pretty much been put on a freeze in this area since April. It could happen at any time at this point, and so I would be believing that there will be a conflict breaking out in this region in the Middle East. It's just that it's going to take some time. It will be happening in between Israel and Lebanon. There's no doubt about that at all. The Israelis will invade southern Lebanon and start taking the area. And I know a lot of people are saying, and I've ended up doing a lot more analysis on this and coming to a different conclusion than the one I used to put out in the past, that the nation of Lebanon is a fairly good country governmentally. It's just the Hezbollah forces in the south that are the problem. That would actually be incorrect. The entirety of Lebanon is largely the problem. The Lebanese central government is so weak and decayed because of really incompetence and ineptitude that Hezbollah pretty much runs the country however it wishes to run it, and the actual central government, the national government, pretty much plays second fiddle to Hezbollah. That's why you'll see that when the Lebanese government was given the ultimatum by France and Israel to deal with Hezbollah themselves and wipe them out before the Israelis had to, Lebanon did nothing. And that's because the Lebanese government really doesn't want to do anything against Hezbollah because they're largely sympathetic towards them and don't really care. I would say, to be quite honest with y'all, if we're going to see a conflict happening in between Israel and Lebanon, it's mostly going to be contained south of the Litani, at least in its opening phase, but it is naturally going to move farther north and most likely will expand throughout the entirety of Lebanon as the Israeli forces continue to just chase the Hezbollah forces on through Lebanon all the way up into the north, because that's the only thing they can do. And the Lebanese government isn't going to physically enforce the Litani border resolution made by the United Nations, because they clearly don't really have that much of a problem with Hezbollah doing whatever they want. And also on top of that, they don't have a problem with Hezbollah forces entering Beirut, which is way far north of the Litani River, and ending up having major rallies there yesterday that the Israelis ended up interrupting by conducting sonic booms over the capital. So I would have to say that as far as it goes, the Israelis are pretty much going to be going to war with the entirety of the nation of Lebanon, and they probably should. It seems to be the only likely option that will be made, but of course there are steps to get to that point. They have to clear the southern Litani area first before they move across the river Litani and then on into the rest of Lebanon. But once again, there are major issues at stake here. There are incredibly major ones. Not only is Iran trying to vie to uproot and throw the United States out of this region, China is very quietly trying to do the same thing. China doesn't do it in the boisterous way that Iran does by supporting and funding proxy forces in the area to directly physically attack American interests and destroy them. China does it in a much more subversive way, largely using economics and trying to pretty much create debt slaves out of most nations in this area to be able to try and draw them to their side. And that is actually ending up becoming more and more appealing to many countries in the Middle East, because they see that the United States isn't a strong defender of the major sphere that we created in this area at this point. We have largely allowed the Houthis to continue to conduct attacks against Saudi Arabia for quite some time, and have continued to destabilize the Republic of Yemen for an incredibly long time as well. And they've also seen that Hamas forces have once again been rearmed and really reinforced up until the October attack of last year, and the Israelis had to deal with that quite significantly, and even still the United States was begging for them to back off after 2,000 Israelis were killed in pretty much a slaughter on a single day. And we've also seen that the United States has continued to plead with the Israelis, even after a direct attack by the Republic of Iran, and also a direct attack multiple times by proxy forces within Lebanon, for them to back off and do nothing. We have pretty much begged everyone in the area to back off and do nothing. And that is not a good stance to be making in terms of foreign policy when we're talking about a major defensive pact or a major coalition that we've made in this area that is for a very important strategic reason. It is to secure fuel supplies in this area, and to not only ensure that they remain continuing to travel into the Western world, but also to deny other countries like China such a precious resource of pretty much unlimited fuel for the next few decades that the Chinese desperately need to be able to continue to grow their economy at the speed they need to be able to reach their national rejuvenation goals by 2049. This is a very important region, and it's very important that the United States continues to assert itself in the area quite strongly, and also make sure to defend our partners and support them in their objectives and in their own defensive goals, to be able to make sure that this region remains strong and remains American aligned, not Chinese aligned or Iranian controlled in the future. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. I see some people are bringing up some politics in the chat. Once again, have to say that we do no politics on this channel. We may have been gone for 5 days, but that does not change the no politics rule. All I'm doing here is stating what's within America's interest to do. I'm not trying to pick a side one way or the other here. I'm just saying what I believe is obvious. And also on top of that, I can't be picking a side because I do know what both sides are saying, and both sides are not saying what I'm saying right now. This is pretty much an entirely third different option, so I know that this is not getting political at all for that reason, because no one else is saying what I'm saying. But with that, I hope that does address that somewhat well, at least within this region. But while we're talking in this region, I did want to bring up something very interesting that the Ukrainians did today. The Ukrainians actually sent in some special forces into Syria and ended up getting some Ukrainian citizens out of the country, which is very interesting. The area that the Ukrainian special forces were in was the Republic of Syria, controlled by the Bashar al-Assad regime. They actually ended up getting a handful of Ukrainian citizens out of the area. You can actually see them right here, holding up the Ukrainian flag. Pretty interesting stuff, because it's once again showing that while the Middle East is a very interesting area, there is a decent amount of Russian influence in this area, and once again, Russian and Iranian influence is coming together to create authoritarian regimes like the Bashar al-Assad regime, and continues to bolster them as much as they possibly can. And while that's going on in the area, something else even more stupid happened with Turkey today, and this was one that I had to bring up because it was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen. I'm not even lying. Many of y'all will know that the Turks are doing Turkey things, and it's really getting to the point that everyone's tired of the Turks and what they're doing, because it's absolute insanity. And while Turkey is providing Ukraine with a couple of Ada-class corvettes manufactured inside of Turkey and provided at the expense of the Turkish government, the Turks decided to do something today that I could only describe as absolute stupidity. Now, this is the port of Murmansk, all the way up here in the north. This is a major port for the Russians, and while it does freeze over in the winter throughout most parts of the year, this is usually a pretty big port access for the Russians, and in World War II, it actually ended up being really the only port access that the Russians had that was within Western Russia, as Leningrad, or modern-day St. Petersburg, was besieged, and also on top of that, Sevastopol and Odessa had been completely captured by German forces. It cannot be understated the kind of strategic importance that Murmansk has during the summer months when it is not frozen over, and it appears that the Turks have also realized this as well and have decided to make a little bit of money off of this little fact. They've decided to provide a floating dock to the Russians, and they're transporting it right now, pictured here. There's the dock, all the way up to Murmansk. This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen, because Murmansk is not only a major logistical port for the Russians commercially and militarily, it's also a naval port. The Russian Navy runs out of that port along with Arkhangelsk, and moving a floating dry dock up into that area is pretty much allowing the Russians to be able to restore and rebuild their fleets or maintain them in this area a lot better than they were. It's literally giving them a repair facility. This is the stupidest thing.
I don't get how they can get away with this, really, because it's like they're like reversing the work of NATO, because NATO is trying to actively help Ukraine win the war. At the same time, Turkey does a few things here and there that could be viewed as maybe helping Ukraine, but at the same time, when they do stuff like this, they're undoing their work. So they're like canceling out the good stuff they've done for Ukraine by doing things like this. So to me, I would have to agree with the guy in the post right here. And I would say Turkey is probably the worst NATO ally at the moment, if not ever in history. This is a very bad situation with Turkey. And like I said before, like I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, nobody's really saying much in the public about why Turkey should be punished over this or if they should be punished. And they're just going sort of like under the radar with this activity, and nobody's really making a big deal about it.
You know what I would do? Because if they're going to start giving floating dry docks to the Russians, I say we play ball with the Turks. How about we get the CIA to go and fund and weaponize the Kurds inside of southeastern Turkey a little bit further, so that way the Turks understand what it's like to be under the gun a little bit more. Because if they want to start playing games like this, where they get all the benefits of being in an EU customs union, where they end up getting NATO protections, but they end up spitting in our face just about every single day with what our plans and objectives are, I say how about we start spitting in the face of Turkish objectives at this point. Now, I will say this is a pretty underhanded thing to do, to send the CIA out into southeastern Turkey to go and fund and supply the Kurds with weapons in that area. If y'all don't know, for a while now, for about the past 15 to 20 years, a group of Kurds that live within southeastern Turkey, very close to the border of Iraq, have actually been fighting a war against the Turkish armed forces and attacking them pretty significantly, and the Turks have ended up using things like the Bayraktar to try and conduct a campaign against them and knock them out, or really wipe them out for the large part. I would say, if they want to do something like that, we will start to do that inside of Turkey. And if they ever have a problem with it, we'll say, well, if you don't want the CIA down there giving them money and giving them guns, maybe you ought to not be selling stuff to the Russians. And maybe you ought to get a little bit more in line with what we're wanting to do and what Western objectives are. I mean, you're supposedly a part of the West, and you're doing nothing along those lines, so we're going to start treating you like you're not a part of the West. And if you don't like that, live with it because we're having to live with the stupid decisions y'all are making, and it can
Now,
only get worse
here's
from
an
here.
interesting point. Here's an interesting point right here. I saw in the live chat from PJ Preacher. He said, "Can Ukraine target the dry dock in Turkey?" Now, that's an interesting question because at what point does that dry dock actually become a legitimate military target? Because it is being given to the Russians by the Turkish government. So, at what point can Ukraine actually target the dry dock that's being given by Turkey?
I wouldn't know. I would feel like the Ukrainians could target it and destroy it. I don't feel like there would be a problem with that at all. And if the Turks made a problem out of it, then the question would be, why did you give them a dry dock? That seems a little stupid, doesn't it? That would be like America selling an Arleigh Burke class destroyer to the Russians and it ends up getting sank, and then we go, Ukraine, what are you doing? It's like it's a war. Like it's going to get blown up. That's what happens. So I don't know. I would feel like they would be able to target it and destroy it. But who knows? The Turks might end up trying to make a problem out of that and end up withdrawing the Ada-class corvettes from being given to Ukraine and end up introducing them into their own navy. I'm not really sure. But one thing I will say, though, is it's a stupid thing that Turkey's doing. That's the best way I can put it. And I feel like we need to start treating the Turkish government about as stupidly as it's acting at this point, because they need to start learning that if you're not going to be in line with Western interests and ideals, and you're actually going to end up spitting in our face while getting all the benefits, we can also spit in their face back the exact same way, and also even worse if we wanted to. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't say, and this is something that should be insinuated with arming and supporting the Kurds if we were ever to make an action like that, is to once again remind Erdogan that Turkey has the Republic of Turkey, has a historic tendency to lean towards military coups that end up throwing the existing leader in charge out of office and introducing a new one. They ought to keep that in mind because that's happened a lot in the past. Now, I'm not saying that America would do something like that because that would be undemocratic. But one thing I would say is that if they continue to go against Western actions, we might not be there to help them the next time a little coup comes around. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll tell someone, whisper something in their ear that NATO might abandon Turkey very soon if things keep going the way they are. And that might spur an uprising from a military commander, say a general, to go and overthrow Erdogan. I don't know. I would keep that in mind, though, as the president of Turkey, and think about that very carefully when making decisions going forward. Because if you work against American and Western interests, you can expect that things will not be going well for you. That just ought to be the norm. And so with that, I hope that kind of lays that out fairly well, at least the best I can from what we would know and what we would see at this point, and also what I might do as president of the United States, or what might happen, just a possibility. I'm not saying that we would do that, but I'm just saying that, something might happen down there, and it would be very unfortunate to see Erdogan get thrown out of power and have someone new brought in that might be a little bit more aligned to NATO. Just a little interesting thought. But anyways, moving on from that and on out of Turkey and back towards Russia, we do have some really interesting news coming out of Chechnya. Really, really interesting news, actually, about Cybertrucks, of all things. But before we get into that, though, we have heard that polls show that 49% of Russians support a withdrawal of troops from Ukraine, pretty much ending the war in all intents and purposes. And a lot of people are wondering, what in the world do we make of that? I mean, that's a pretty wild poll. And a lot of people are saying that Russian citizens really do want the war to end. It's not really ending up producing anything beneficial, and they kind of want it to just be over with. Really, everyone wants it to be over with. Some people say that the Russians really don't mind the war, which there's been a pretty good argument for that throughout the length of it. Some people are saying that the poll sounds a bit like propaganda, and that's also what British people do when they take a good look at something. They take a propaganda. And also, we got to see that some people were a little unsure, not deciding. Well, Matthew gets a laugh out of it. But beyond that, Matthew, what are people thinking about this? Are they thinking that this is legitimate, or are they thinking it's fake? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so now that the polls are showing that 49%, just shy of half of Russians support a withdrawal of troops from Ukraine, what do you make of it? 68% said Russia's citizens want the war to end, while 13% said Russia really doesn't mind the war, and 12% said the poll sounds like some propaganda. And I would have to say this. I'm not really sure how they're able to conduct a proper poll inside of Russia at the moment, considering the country is basically a dictatorship at this point. But however they were able to do this, they say 49%, almost half the country, wants the war to end, basically. And that would make sense, but not because Russians probably think the war is unjust. Probably a good portion of those 50% probably actually think the war might be somewhat justified. But now that they're actually starting to get hurt, basically in their homes, their sons and daughters and things like that are being affected by this war. Their sons are getting killed in Ukraine, left and right, basically, by Putin. Then now they're realizing this is really affecting us personally now, and now we have a reason to stop the war. So that's probably what they're thinking, and that's probably why they want it to end if that poll is accurate. So I would actually have to be with a 67%, but Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I would have to be with the 67% as well. I find it fairly believable that war fatigue is really starting to set in, and a lot of Russians want the war to end. This would be pretty in line with what we started to see around this point, around the third year of World War I and World War II. Specifically in World War II, in countries like the UK and Nazi Germany, war fatigue was starting to set in a little bit. Not as much as it did in the First World War, though. In the First World War, war fatigue was really setting in on everyone around the same times. About the 30-year mark of World War I, which would have been about 1917, the Germans were dealing with a very low morale situation in the Imperial German Army. The French were dealing with outright mutinies and were having to just execute people for mutinying. The British were dealing with very low war support, and they even started to make songs in the UK about when the war would be over and how much they hated the war. And also on top of that, British news publications were even putting out stuff about how long the war was going on. In Russia, they literally ended up going into a civil war and creating the Soviet Union, because they retired the war, also because the Germans ended up shipping Lenin back into Russia because he was exiled, but that's a whole other point. The Austro-Hungarians were on the verge of collapse by this point because everyone was tired of fighting the war against the Russian Empire, not really Italy. Italy was a whole other thing, but the Russian Empire, they were tired of fighting. The Turks were, the Ottomans at that point were starting to crumble as well. Really, everyone was getting into some significant war fatigue. The only two countries I can't think of that got into really bad war fatigue during World War I was Italy, which was fighting against the Austro-Hungarians, and while they fought like 19 battles of Asanzo, they ended up not really getting that fatigued from the fighting. And the United States, which ended up joining in the last 11 months of the war, ended up really only fighting for the last 7 months. And so they weren't really around long enough to get the fatigue side of things. They were just around for the fun of it. So going off of that, I would say war fatigue probably is setting in because it would fall in line with historical precedents laid during World War I, which is a very similar kind of a war to the one we're seeing right now, at least in the terms of the intensity and casualties that are being taken. So going off of that, I would say without a doubt the Russians probably are tired of the war and would want it to end. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And before we move on into Chechnya, we do have some very interesting questions. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so our first question of the night is going to go to a channel legend. It's K-Dub Janky, and thank you very much, K-Dub, for that $50 support. Very generous, and we appreciate it very much. And K-Dub says, how did Luxembourg and Liechtenstein come to exist with so many powerful European powers around them?
Very interesting question. You see, Liechtenstein actually existed. This is actually a very interesting story about Liechtenstein. They existed because of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, specifically the Holy Roman Empire, but later on it turned into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, the city-state of Liechtenstein did exist during the Holy Roman Empire when, I believe, Switzerland and all the cantons that were in Switzerland were also part of the HRE, and so it was a pretty normal thing at the time to see a city-state of this size in the HRE. There were hundreds of them. But later on, when Austria-Hungary began to exist, Liechtenstein used their political sway and influence, really a lot of the money that the royal family, I believe it's the House of Vaduz, has in Liechtenstein, to be able to ensure that Liechtenstein wasn't really integrated into Austria-Hungary like other small city-states were later on. And so they were able to ensure their autonomy for a pretty good bit. And then when the collapse of Austria-Hungary started to occur, they largely just bounced out. Like, they didn't really say they were Austro-Hungarian or anything. They just went completely independent, completely autonomous. And that's how they largely remain to this day. It really has to do a lot with the influence that the House of Vaduz has in Liechtenstein that was able to ensure that they were able to survive. So really the best way to explain how Liechtenstein survived was through very good politicking throughout hundreds of years of history and ensuring that they were able to keep hold of this very small amount of land. And so the other thing, the interesting thing about Luxembourg is that I don't believe Luxembourg actually has existed for that long of an amount of time. And let me make sure to check on that. And so Luxembourg, and here is Luxembourg, and let's see here. I need to find, yep, here we go. So Liechtenstein, oh, actually Luxembourg, sorry, became independent in 1815, because if I remember correctly, it was either a part of Belgium throughout most of history, or it was a part of the French Empire. And so going off of that, let's see here. Actually, interestingly enough, according to this, it was actually in a union with the Netherlands. And so that's very interesting right there. But beyond that, moving on from that and just explaining how Luxembourg survived, Luxembourg ended up existing at the end of the Congress of Vienna in 1815, which largely ensured the balance of power in Europe. And this was kind of the first time that we saw any sort of collective movement in Europe to pretty much maintain the status quo. So considering that Luxembourg literally got crapped right out of the French Empire right at the end of 1815, and the Congress of Vienna happened just right at that point, Luxembourg was largely ensured survival, because if anyone took Luxembourg from one or the other and ended up just absorbing it, it would end up affecting the balance of power, and that would end up causing some very major issues with what the Congress of Vienna laid out. And so largely for that reason, Luxembourg was protected really just because it popped up at the perfect time in history to be able to exist as such a small country and not get absorbed by the Germans, the French, or Belgium in the process. And so I hope that kind of addresses that somewhat well. I'm not really sure about the specific history of Luxembourg. Liechtenstein is a story that a lot of people know because it's such a weird phenomenon in the world that Liechtenstein exists. But there's a lot of other small countries like that throughout Europe. Like, for example, there's San Marino right down here, which is a really interesting micronation inside of Italy. There's also Andorra, which is over here in the Pyrenees, right here, which is a very, very small landlocked country in the middle of a mountain range, which is also an incredibly weird one. There's also Monaco, which is a very famous one. And let me see if I can find Monaco here. Where the hell is Monaco? I don't really look at Monaco.
Monaco is an interesting little country because it actually was on the verge of going bust. And then they realized, hey, if we put casinos here in Monaco, we can actually like lure in the rich, like they can pull their yachts up and stuff like that, and then come here and gamble a ton of money, and we'll raise a ton of money that way, and Monaco will grow. And that's actually what they did, and that's what formed Monaco into the powerhouse it is right now, where the wealthy spend a ton of money, and you'll see like all these fancy cars and stuff going around Monaco, all these huge yachts pulled up to it. That's because of the casinos that were there that actually made Monaco into basically what it is.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting history with the smaller countries like that. And generally, when you see smaller countries, they actually are fairly wealthy. Usually, most of them are, because they try and find out ways to generate a decent amount of income because they really don't have the land to produce income by natural means. Like, France produces income by all sorts of means. I mean, literally any kind of industry, any kind of agriculture that you could imagine is how the French ended up becoming an incredibly wealthy country by GDP. And then later on, through their service industry, like many countries around the world have, like America. But with smaller countries like San Marino, Monaco, Andorra, Liechtenstein, and Luxembourg, they have to end up coming up with very creative ways to make a lot of money. And so you'll see things like Monaco, which is actually down there, it finally listed Monaco, this tiny little sliver of a country ends up making most of its money through the casinos, really through just tourism. You'll see that a country like Andorra makes a good amount of its money through tourism as well. You'll see that countries like Switzerland, which is probably one of the larger nations of the smaller ones, ends up making a lot of their money through their financial institutions and also other means, but it's really hard for me to explain those. And then Liechtenstein actually makes a lot of its money from dentures. Like, I'm not kidding. Luxembourg and Liechtenstein both make a large amount of their GDP off of making dentures. Like, I'm not kidding. It's actually a really big industry for the both of them. And a country like Israel, which is also, in the big scheme of things, a fairly small country, they actually make a lot of their national GDP up in processing uncut diamonds, which is how Israel makes up about, I think it's like 30% of their GDP. So that's actually kind of interesting to talk about. But one of the most common ways that smaller countries make a big amount of money is either through tourism or either through some sort of a financial institution. Hong Kong is a very good example of that as well, and that's why the the People's Republic of China wanted it so badly, is because Hong Kong under British rule existed as a crown colony, or really more so kind of like an independent micro country. And because of that, they ended up implementing all of these crazy, wacky financial rules that you really didn't see anywhere else in the world. So it made it really beneficial to trade or do business with Hong Kong because there was so much money to be made. And in Hong Kong, because of all the business they were getting, they'd skim a little off the top and they were making a killer amount of money. And they still kind of do that these days. Hong Kong actually has an insanely high GDP. And that's largely why these countries exist, because the little countries can always exist, but they really can't exist well if they don't have good money coming in. And so they have to find a way to be able to do that. Another good example, a final example that I can give, is Singapore. Singapore actually was not an independent country for a long time. It actually became one, I believe, in the mid-50s, because the nation of Malaysia, which Singapore was attached to, was sick and damn tired of the people of Singapore pretty much telling the entire country what to do. Because Singapore, well, in Malaysia, the voting system doesn't run off of an electoral college system or anything like that. It runs off of the popular vote. And considering that at the time, the majority of the population of Malaysia lived in Singapore, they pretty much told everyone what to do in the country because they would always win the popular vote on literally everything. And so Malaysia got so sick and tired of that, the entire country came together and said, let's get the hell out of there. And they literally kicked Singapore out. They forced them into becoming an independent country. It's one of the first times in the world that anything like that has ever happened, where everyone collectively came together in a country and said, we hate those people so much, we want them gone. They are now going to be forced to be independent. And so that's how Singapore became independent. But once again, they make a lot of their money out of the financial incentives that they give to people to trade there, and also they're a major shipping hub as well. You can see a large amount of their port infrastructure down here that is a kind of a part of their financial but also trade institutions. They make an insane amount of money off of trade, and that's why Singapore is always known around the world as being so nice and high class really throughout the entirety of the city, or really the entirety of the city-state, is because they make a lot of their money off of the trade institution. So, pretty cool thing, like a pretty cool thing to talk about city-states and how they work. So, you know, still, it seems kind of sad, though, that an entire country would band together to agree that they hate your city so much they're going to make it independent. Like, that's got to feel bad. But still, I think Malaysia ended up regretting that, because Singapore is such a wealthy and prosperous city these days that it really would have been a massive boon for Malaysia to keep Singapore in, but they didn't. So anyways, with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, KW Janky. Thank you so much for the massive support, by the way, and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now and getting to run this channel for everyone. It is an incredibly small group of people every single night that band together on this channel and support it through super chats to be able to make this thing possible for everyone. Out of about the 42,000 people who've watched this stream so far tonight, only about 20 people have thrown in the super chat, and those 20 people are making it possible for us to run this channel for every single person here tonight. And I got to give a big thanks to you once again, KW Janky, for being one of those people supporting the channel massively and helping us to make this thing possible, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to keep this thing running so far, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running tonight. So a big thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next question goes to Jody Mandelias, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Jody, for that support as well. And they said, LSA forever. And take one from the chat, and Grim Beeper, beep beep.
And hey, LSA forever, baby. And thank you so much for the support, Jody Mandelias. And also, Grim Beeper, meep meep. And also, thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. It means a lot. And I got to say, thank you. It means a lot. It really does. And of course, if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running. And so we will make sure to take a live chat. So what do we got, Matthew?
And the live chat goes to Orion, who says, do you think that Turkey will remain a U.S. ally past 2030?
I'm doubting it, to be entirely honest. I think they're almost at the point already of breaking off and doing their own thing, so I would highly doubt by 2030 they would still be our ally. They are trying to produce a mini-sphere in the area that will pretty much sustain Turkey completely separate from anyone else, and it looks like they're really starting to move towards that incredibly quickly. Honestly, faster than I thought they would, especially with what they've been doing over just the past few months. So with that, I hope that does address that live chat incredibly well. Big thank you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on being possible. And with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the remainder of the news.
All right, and our last one here goes to Joe Little, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Joe, as well, for that support. He said, fun fact, you can buy your own bunker and live in your World War II decommissioned ammunition bunker in Edgemont, South Dakota. And look up listings on Zillow, Bunker RD, Edgemont, South Dakota.
Huh, Bunker RD in Edgemont, South Dakota. Here we go.
Is that like those bunkers you can get on GTA, like you can go buy a bunker?
Maybe? Let's see. Oh, dang. Dude, there's like a lot of them, actually. Let me show you. Let me show you. So here it is. This is the bunker. So let's take a look at it.
Oh, look at that. 64,000. Man, it's cheaper than a house.
Oh, well, that's all there is to it. It's literally just a hardened shelter that you, like, keep ammo or something in. I don't know if I'd want
I
this.
can make that work.
I don't know if I want this, though, Matthew, for like 64 grand. It doesn't even have like plumbing or anything. And how in the world do you get like plumbing and electricity through like multiple feet of concrete and ground? Like, that would be incredibly difficult, man. Like, I don't know. These are cool, though. I will say that. And it seems like there's
How
like
much square footage does it have?
2,000.
Man, that's a damn steal. I'll take it today.
Honestly, that is a steal. Like, $64,000 may get you like 1 month's rent in LA. So it is a bit of a steal. Not that bad. There are
Listen,
millions.
here's the plan. Here's the plan with it. If you put some solar panels on the top, you can get the power. You put the Starlink out there, you got the Wi-Fi. You just need a way to purify some water, and you're like totally off the grid in that thing right there with hardly any bills, except for the property taxes, if there is any.
Man, honestly, though, houses are cheap all around here. Like, you can get this one, a real house for like 1,700 square feet for only $110,000. Like, this is like 1990s prices out here, really.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Like zoom out a little bit. Where is this in South Dakota?
This is way down in like the southwestern end. I'll show you over here. So it is about right around here. Here's Edgemont.
Oh, it's out in the middle of nowhere. That's why it's like that.
Yeah, it's out in the middle of nowhere, man. Like, the closest thing to it is Crazy Horse and Hot Springs, and that's like nothing, pretty much.
Interesting. So, I mean, it could still work, but you'd have to like, want to stay out there for a minute. And also, you have no window, so I think you'd probably go nuts. But yeah, you could make it work.
Dude, I would not live out there. Like, me personally, I wouldn't live out there because we also wouldn't be able to run our show from out there, really. But still, it is pretty cool. And also, one other thing, like, what does Hot Springs look like? Let's see here. Oh, they have a Pioneer Museum. What is this about? Oh, it's actually a really nice building. And, oh, it's just like any normal museum that you would find where it's just like stuff, like, put out. Like, it has really no purpose or explanation. What the hell is this?
Oh, that's that's how they make baby cow.
I honestly, though, I thought it was just two friends having a hug, but all right, Matthew, we'll go with that. All right, that's cool. Whiskey River. It doesn't look like it's open. I don't think it's open. I think the owners ended up going into a Whiskey River and ended up spiraling into debt. Let's see here. Two Cows Creamery and Bistro. It doesn't look like this place is bad, though. Like, let me just pick like the overall pictures of the town. Huh. Yeah, this place is actually pretty cool. Like, it's kind of like Jackson Hole, but for South Dakota, and honestly, not like Jackson Hole because Jackson Hole is interesting. But still, yeah, not that. Wow, look how clear that water is, dude. You could drink that.
Yeah, that's very clear.
Dude, it's a river of Dasani. Like it's a whole river.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's actually Deer Park because no one drinks Dasani. Like unironically.
Oh, yeah. You went from two terrible ones, Dasani and Deer Park. They both taste like dirt.
Well, what do you drink?
That Aquafina, that's the premium stuff.
Yeah, I don't know about that, man. I don't know about that, man. But still, not a bad place. I would check this place out someday. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And a big thanks to you once again for support, Joe Little, and showing us that interesting little bit, that tidbit that we could now know about South Dakota. We can go and get an ammunition bunker out there if we wanted to, and we could live in it. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we're going to be moving on out of this question segment and on into the remainder of our news, and specifically the Chechen Cybertrucks. This is only a small glimpse of what is to come. And I'm going to show you all these pictures. You can see them all right there. And then we're going to move on to the video that we have right here. So check this one out. And we're going to be muting that. But we can see them going on along in their Cybertrucks here. I don't think they're able to control them that well. Not shocking for the Chechens.
I thought that Kadirov's Cybertruck just got bricked the other day. Like, they turned it off and he couldn't, like, reactivate it or something.
Yeah, that's what I was told. Apparently, these haven't been bricked yet. But I'm having a feeling they're about to get bricked. Dude, they can hardly drive.
I think there's so many, by the way. Like, I could see, like, getting one through a shell company. But this looks like several, actually.
It is several. It looks like maybe 2 or 3 of them. Honestly, man, they look pretty goofy. Like, you know, no joke. Like,
I'll be honest, they actually kind of look cool out there. But for once, they kind of look goofy on the street, but they look cool in like an outdoor setting.
I don't know. Also, how in the world do they get 50 cals too? They say they hate America, but they're riding around an American pickup truck and firing American machine guns. I'm not understanding how this makes sense.
It's stupid. They want to destroy the company they just bought the car from.
Yeah, it's pretty dumb when you think about it, but I guess that's just how the Russian psyche works, I suppose. Also, Mandy, I don't know about you, but have you noticed that since we've come back tonight, there's been like this insanely high number of bots? Like, I've never seen this many before we left. It's like we came back and had a homecoming, and now everyone's got to try and flood in and bot the hell out of this thing.
Yeah, it's actually not that many, but I've seen a few.
Man, I've seen some. But moving on from that, we also get to see the Ukrainians checking out Snake Island today. And boy, does it look not like a snake. We're going to be muting that, but we can see them going up to Snake Island and looking at it. And there it is, the Island of Snakes.
That's a perfect island for the Russians to go on right there because it's full of snakes.
Man, that's just like the Russian State Duma.
And put them around the island. Let them have it. Oh,
Man.
Look at that. A little burned out little vehicle or something.
Man, they got up there on the island, they checked it out, they said, there's no Russians here, and then they left. Mad respect to them. Respectable. And with that, that's the end of that clip. Interesting to see. And we're going to be moving on out of the Snake Island area. And we're going to be moving on up into our location unknowns, because we've actually gotten a couple of interesting ones. Starting off with our first one, we got to see a modified Leopard 1A5 on the training grounds. This thing was actually pretty wild. It almost looks like a Leopard 2K with how the turret ended up looking after they added all the ERA tiles. But not that bad. Actually pretty cool to see. And moving on into our next one, we also got to see that now the Ukrainians also have Iranian ammo in use inside of Ukraine. We don't know where they got it from. It was actually manufactured fairly recently in 2023, and it's now in Ukrainian hands. We don't know how to explain that, but still really nice to note. Moving on from that, we also get to see a Pantsir in service with some additional armor added on the Russian side. Pretty rough looking to me. Looks like a box. And in the next bit, we also got to see the Azov unit coming together and having a little celebration of their own victories.
Дякую кожному солдату, сержанту, офіцеру, всьому командуванню за надійне виконання бойового завдання, яке було поставлено бригаді. Ми не втратили жодної позиції, лише контратакували, проводили наступальні операції та рухалися вперед.
Служу українській нації!
Сьогодні вручимо шеврон нашого підрозділу, нашого батальйону. Шеврон, на якому зображений двозуб київського князя Святослава Хороброго. Його символ, під яким княжі вої йшли в бої, здобували звитягу і перемоги, зміцнювали славу української зброї. Тепер цей княжий історичний символ буде символом нашого підрозділу. Слава Україні!
Pretty cool.
And Ukraine above all. I'll tell you what.
Man, I'm telling you. But moving on from that, we also got to see the Russian casualty report for the past 24 hours, and it wasn't good.
5 Bobcats, 5 today. Look at that bot over there. They said, such a bullshit. What the hell? Man, these bots are just getting really blunt out here with that. And also, they're using the wrong guy on the meme. That guy's British. But anyways, 6 Bobcats. I love to see it. But Enforcer, tell us more.
This guy's got a link tree. What the hell do you need a link
Don't
tree
click
for?
that.
Yeah, I'm not clicking that. Like, I saw that, and I was immediately like, we're not clicking on that, but we are noting that. Why the hell is there a link tree there? You want to see nice Russian asshole? Click on link. You click on it, and it takes you to a picture of Putin or something. But beyond that, 1,340 soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, an incredibly high number. The 12th highest daily loss record, according to Mistisa. Big shout out to Mistisa for including that over there in the comments section. 39 APCs were destroyed, along with 59 supply trucks, 20 main battle tanks, 35 artillery systems, 52 drones, 1 cruise missile, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, and 6 Bobcat skid steers. Today was actually a pretty good day, and it looks as though the losses continue to be high for the Russians as they continue to have a pretty tough time fighting the war. Moving on from that and over into the Vovchansk area, we also got to see the 3rd Brigade conducting actions in the Kharkiv front. We're going to have to be muting the boom, whoa, whoa music.
Whoa.
Dude, that's what I sounded like when I saw that guy in LA. I went boom, whoa. When I saw that
guy, he was that guy, pal.
He was that guy, pal. And also when I saw a hot dog or two, I went whoa. I was like, I gotta take a picture of that, man.
Whoa, I get no respect around here. Whoa.
Oh man, I'm telling you, I get no respect around here. Oh man. That we can see them wandering around, popping off a pistol right there. A Glock of all guns. Shooting the Glock and spinning the block, winning the Glock. I've never seen the 3rd Brigade do that before. That's new. And we can see them continuing their actions in the area, in their little trench, continuing to fire at the Russians, moving forward. Evacuating the wounded, getting on out of there. And that's the end of the clip, but really nice to see, and good to know the 3rd Brigade's doing their job. Moving on down and into Kupiansk, we also get to see that the Russians are now also using thermite drones as well. We're going to be using that, but we can see the Russian drone flying over. It literally does the same thing the Ukrainian drones do, and that's a pretty important point to bring up, because it looks like the Russians have now learned about what the Ukrainians are doing, and they're also starting to try and implement the same kind of drones, doing the same kind of things.
I think this one's going a little bit faster, though. It looks like it's out of control.
Honestly, it doesn't really look like it's dropping thermite. It just looks like it's making a streak in the sky, and that's about it.
Where's it going crazy?
What the hell is it doing?
Man, it's just scaring the shit out of you on the ground. It's not really burning anything, though.
Everyone just hears it going. It's like, okay, it's like nothing's happening, though.
Oh, Blyat, look out, Blyat, it's the Russians.
Man, I'm telling you, man. Oh, man, I'm telling you. Oh, man, I get no respect around here. I make a brand new drone. The Russians copy it. Oh, man, I'm telling you.
Oh. He died.
Unfortunate. But still, Once again, the Russians are copying what the Ukrainians are doing. There's proof now. And we did get to see that the Russians are having to deal with these drones a lot, and it's ending up causing a lot of damage. We can actually see a burned position of the Russians in this clip right here.
Ничего не уцелело. Всё в трубу. Вот блиндажик был, обрушился, сгорел. Вот здесь то же самое. МПшка, где сидели, чей-то ствол.
Oh, a little burnt AK right there. Isn't that nice?
Позиции. Всё. Ничего не осталось. Восстановить не получится. Работы слишком много. Короче, вот так. Даже здесь в лисьей норе все у нас горело. Вот такие дела.
And we see them continuing to walk around and show the devastation as they fly their drone over and show it from above.
Сожгли полностью выход к третьей роте. Тут пизда, что творится. Просто всю посадку сожгли. Я не знаю, как там третья рота, блядь, сейчас находится. Мы еще помимо этого запись экрана ведем.
And with that is the end of the clip. But as you can see, the little thermite drones are ending up being really effective these days. Moving on down into Bakhmut, we also get to see the Ukrainian snipers were hitting them at night. Kind of like how you grill them at night. And so, check it out. We're going to be muting the horror music here. Number 15, the Ukrainian sniper, also known as the Blackjack of Chasiv. The Ukrainian sniper was known to pick off Russians at night. This was very similar to the joke made by Shane Gillis, where he said they cook grilled cheese at night, and this was known by the Russians as the grilled cheese sniper. Something like that, you know, just someone come up with some weird lore to it, but still, this guy is getting them.
Oh, wow. That's 2 times magnification on this shot? There's 4 times, I think.
Oh, 8, 16, 2, 4, 8.
He's a good ways away.
He is a good ways away. Oh, and a little pop, and he's down. He took a nap. Listen, folks, he's only hitting him with tranquilizers. Jeez, folks. They're just
They got trank in Ukraine now?
Oh, no.
That's still spreading everywhere.
We're going to go down to downtown Bakhmut. You're going to see a lot of Russians down there in tents. You might think they're homeless, but they're actually just in the Russian army, but they got something new. It's bigger than crocodile. They got trank. And then you see, like, all of them just, like, slumped over in the street. You can't tell if they're drunk on vodka or legit just absolutely zooted on trank. But beyond that, still, nice to see this Ukrainian sniper doing their job. And moving on from that, we also get to see them hitting a Nona. And some people would be like, oh, why in the world do we need to know about this? Because it's Nona your business. I always got to make that pun. Great Loner just said, Mr. Enforcer, there's been a second ammo dump. What? Why? What do you mean? What do you mean? And we can see the next drone slamming on down right there. Really nice to see.
I don't see any evidence of a second ammo depot being hit. I'm looking on the Twitter right now, and I don't see it.
Whoa. Look at that boiler. And everyone's saying second ammo dump? Right now, we're not seeing any confirmation of that. So, no, there is no second ammo dump at the moment. But if we get any confirmation of that, we will report it if it is true. But with that, that's the end of that clip. Really nice to see the Ravrall unit knocking out a Nona in the area. And moving on from that and a little bit further on down the lines and towards Novobot-Makivka, we also get to see the Ukrainians slamming some Russian observation drones over the area of this town. Check it out. There's the Russian observation drone, and here comes the Ukrainian observation knot. And it's going to stop them from observing. And there it was right there. It just stopped them. And now we're going to see it happen a second time on another drone. And very gently, coming on down, nice and good. Bam! Right there on the nail! And they got it.
Ah, yes, I see you know your drone warfare well.
Get your hands off my joystick! This is the bloke who touched me on the joystick, people. Oh! Oh, and you, sir, I see you know your jeweler well. Good one. And you, sir, are you ready to receive my limp joystick? How dare you, sir? But beyond that, moving on from this clip, and that drone getting knocked around pretty voraciously, we also get to see the Russians under fire. Check this out. All right, we're going to be muting that, but we can see the Russians in the trees right there. And we see one of them get hit, kind of hit pretty hard. The other guy, he starts packing up his stuff. He's getting ready to leave.
Man, he's literally packing up and heading out. Uh-oh.
He's like, hello, comrade. Oopsies. Hello, wake up. Did you take a Dramamine, bullet? Come on, get up. He's like, oh, okay. Well, that's not good, bullet. And he just wanders off. Goodbye. And yeah, that is that, bullet. But anyways, that is the end of the clip right there. Very interesting to see. And moving on from that, we also got to see a couple of Ukrainian helicopter pilots resting for a moment. Yes, the stuff of nightmares right here. Some duck-billed looking guys just hanging out near a small campfire, cooking weenies. Oh my goodness, Matthew! Hot dog men! Hot dog men! They're here!
Man, even the Ukrainians roast hot dog man.
Aw, man, not even these people have respect for me. Aw, man. Aw, man, I need my viewers to fund another vacation for me. Aw, man, I'll make it sound like I'm saving the world or something to justify me harassing them. Aw, man. Also sick Krink, by the way. I love the Krink. But moving on from that little picture, and on further down the line, and towards Volhodar, we also get to see the destruction of Russian forces down in this area. Music ensues. So we're going to be muting that, but here comes the Russians, barreling across the field. Oh, and they're just getting hit from all over. Oh my goodness! Much like the people at Diddy's, the Russians are getting blown out. Oh my goodness, look at them. I mean, this is something else right here. Like, this is insane. They are getting absolutely hammered.
Oh, they said he was just freakier than the rest.
Man, I don't know if you heard about what they found today, but I think he was a little bit more than freaky. I'll tell you that, man.
No, I'm just saying what I heard from someone who also defended him. Like this, they said, "Oh, he's just a little freakier than the rest." I'm like, I don't know about that. I think it might go a little bit beyond that.
Man, I'm telling you, I'll be honest with you, man. It goes beyond that, man. Because I heard something today, and I was like, dang. So I can't even say it on stream. I'll tell you what it was afterwards, though. Pretty much to summarize it, though, every rapper that is famous right now, Matthew, that we know of, may have not been famous if it wasn't for Diddy getting to play his little games with them. Like, that's something that kind of came out today. So that was a little interesting. So
they all played like hopscotch or something?
Not that kind of a game. It was a different one. But pretty much to summarize, he's like the Harvey Weinstein, apparently, of the rapper world. Like, he's that for that category. I was like, that's interesting. Did not know that, but now we do.
Interesting. Also, I see someone said thousands of bottles of baby oil. Okay. All right then. Well, I'm just gonna say he likes to party and you gotta tell him no. Definitely tell him no, without a doubt.
And a lot of people weren't telling him no. but on that bombshell, it's time for us to move on up to Kyiv and cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 940 of the war. It actually brought us to the wrong speech right there. But nevertheless, here is the speech. Speech!
Здоров'я, шановні українці і українки, провів сьогодні ставку. Доповідь головкома Сирського по фронту і про наші операції в Курській області. Важливо, що наші бойові бригади максимально стійко отримують позиції. Були доповіді розвідок, ГУР, Буданов, служба зовнішньої розвідки Іващенко. І дуже детально і навіть емоційно ми обговорили питання про виробництво дронів та забезпечення дронами усіх елементів Сил оборони та безпеки. Також говорили сьогодні про виробництво ракет, систем РЕП та відповідну взаємодію з партнерами. Доповідали Умєров, Сибіга, Федоров, військові, Служба безпеки України, Малюк. Дійсно, детальна розмова. Головне, щоб не тільки були контракти та фінансування під них, але й швидкість реального виробництва, реального постачання. І тематика енергетична – це суттєва частина засідання ставки сьогодні. Були доповіді прем'єр-міністра Шмигаля, міністра енергетики Галущенка щодо фізичного захисту об'єктів, реальної ситуації з відновленням. Проговорили і ту загрозу, яку зараз бачимо з боку Росії для нашої генерації. Ми будемо протидіяти. Енергетику детально обговорювали із Урсулою фон дер Ляєн, президенткою Єврокомісії. Сьогоднішній її візит додав Україні чутливої підтримки. Є новий пакет для нашої енергетики від Євросоюзу – 160 мільйонів євро. Також є і домовленість щодо збільшення імпорту електрики в Україну, те, що обов'язково підтримує нашу державу, наших людей в складних ситуаціях. Обговорили з Урсулою кроки, які допоможуть зберегти нам щонайменше чверть генерації. Звичайно, говорили і про нашу політичну взаємодію з Євросоюзом. Ми маємо прискорити процес перемовин щодо членства і підготовку відповідних частин майбутньої угоди. Є важливе рішення Урсули про європейську підтримку для нашої української програми шкільного харчування. Тобто в усьому, від оборони до соціальних питань, ми маємо справді хороші результати. Урсуло, дякую тобі. Ще одне. Активно готуємось до перемовин в Америці. Це президент Байден, представники обох партій в Конгресі. Розраховуємо на зустрічі із обома кандидатами в президенти Сполучених Штатів. Ми в Україні завжди будемо вдячними Америці за підтримку нашої незалежності, за всю надану допомогу, щоб Україна вистояла у цій війні. І тепер ми представимо цілком конкретний план, як Україні в цій війні не просто вистояти, не просто тримати рівень спротиву, як зараз, але саме зараз посилитись так, щоб реально наблизити справедливий мир, реально наблизити перемогу. Україна розраховує на цю підтримку дуже, і це справедливо, бо коли один народ виграє битву за свою незалежність і дотримання міжнародного права, увесь світ виграє. І саме так має бути. Дякую всім, хто з нами, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
And Iran Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 940 of the war. And that's moving us on into the second segment of the stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And what a fun segment it is, because this is the point, this is the part that I look forward to the most, is getting to talk to each and every single one of y'all about what in the world y'all want to talk about. Anything and everything is on the table, except for politics. That's always off the table, but beyond that, we can't wait, because I always have a fun time with this. I always do. We always do. And also, you always have some very interesting questions to throw in that we can talk about, or very interesting things like hood reviews and stuff like that. But with that, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so jumping into our final question segment of the night, we have one from LSA Rocks, who puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, LSA Rocks, who's a channel legend, for that support once again. And he says, can you explain the leaf spring in LSA again for those new that have been asking earlier, and also take one from the chat?
And thank you so much for the support. LSA rocks and helping this channel to keep on running. And we will answer that question. It's actually a really good one. So to let y'all know, and also, oh wait, what Matthew? What? Who blocked us? Who blocked us? Where? What's going on here?
I'll just tell you later instead of getting into it on the stream.
Oh, got you. But anyways, moving on from that. The Leaf Spring Army, which is what the LSA stands for, is a bit of a joke. Well, the name was formed through a joke. The actual community is a pretty serious one, at least with the kind of interest it has. But the name is a bit of a joke. It comes from way back in the day. I made a mistake of saying that leaf spring suspension systems are archaic and outdated and are not used anywhere, which is factually completely wrong. Like, they're used, like, literally everywhere. And I don't know why I thought that at the time, but for some reason I did, and it was completely wrong. And I got flamed for that. Like, for 2 straight days on this channel, the live chat just flamed me for saying that. And at the time, there was this very interesting thing that went on behind the scenes, because this all happened before the Great Schism, which some of y'all were here for. I don't know how many of y'all were here for that, but some of y'all were around to watch the Great Schism happen. But anyways, Matthew had just become my co-host on the stream. Before that, there was another one whose name shall not be mentioned. It's stricken from the archival records. But beyond that, Matthew and me were trying to figure out what to do about this, because I was getting flamed endlessly about it. And the original group of moderators that we had on the Discord server, which were getting power hungry at this point, trying to tell me what to do on every aspect of everything on the channel, were pretty much telling me to completely ignore it. And if I didn't ignore it, they were going to be very unhappy with me if I didn't. And I acted ashamed and tried to shoot it down. And Matthew and me decided that it would be a lot better to just lean into it, because it was truly a mistake. Why in the world be ashamed of making a mistake? A mistake is human. So we decided largely that we would embrace it, and we would just start to make a joke about it, like everyone else was making a joke about it. So I was like, dang, y'all keep on bringing up leaf springs, like some kind of a group of people that are obsessed with leaf springs. And then someone in the chat said it's like a leaf spring army. And then I saw that, and I was like, hey, that sticks. That's pretty good. So we're going to be the LSA from here forward. And that's how the actual LSA was born. And we actually have a specific birthday for the LSA every single year that we celebrate here on the stream. It's a pretty big ordeal. We actually have an LSA week, but there's a specific day that the LSA was founded on, and it's a pretty cool thing overall. But the LSA, as far as the name's a bit of a joke that comes from channel lore, but the LSA as a community has a very specific set of guidelines that it follows. Members of the LSA that like profess that they're a part of the LSA, that have like LSA imagery in their profiles and things like that, are very supportive of American and Western interests around the globe, however that ends up coalescing. Members of the LSA do not really get into open political discussions on the internet, domestic political discussions, that is. They completely avoid that, and largely anything and everything the LSA does is in support of some sort of a larger objective of supporting the West and its interests. That's kind of what the LSA has ended up becoming in the end, and we're really trying to make sure that that's solidified in the background, because that's really the main takeaway of the LSA. The LSA isn't really just the name itself and, you know, the imagery and the symbology revolving around it. It's really the kind of community that's ended up turning into because of the channel it's attached to. It is a pro-Western, pro-American community. It completely removes itself from domestic politics, and it just pushes forward the idea that America is a great country. Really, the Western world is a great sphere, and it has its flaws, but everyone should be working harder and harder every single day to try and make sure that we continue to stay at the top of the heap and continue to stay at the leading sphere of the world. That's what we should be. And also, largely the LSA, you know, we don't really get into this that much, but I always bring it up every once in a while. The LSA believes that regardless of what kind of a job you have, whether you're a janitor or whether you're the president of the United States, every single person has an incredibly important role to fulfill in the continuance of this nation every single day, and everyone in the Western world and every single country that is a part of the West has the very same kind of commitment to their own nation. Every single person plays a very important part in making their nation succeed and strive to push forward each and every single day, even if it ends up being a bit of a struggle. Every person plays their part, no matter big or small, and it's an incredibly important one. But that's kind of what the LSA is, because we don't really get to explain a lot about that. Like, everyone is LSA, but what is the LSA? And I hope that kind of clarifies not only where the LSA came from, like where the name came from and everything and what it means, but also what the community stands for, because it's fairly different, incredibly different than other communities that exist out there that kind of popped up because of the war. Because there's another community out there, they're a somewhat well-intentioned community, but it seems as though, like, I don't know what it is, but like craziness is kind of set in. Like, I've heard that one other community is like almost advocating for like nuclear weapons to be given to Ukraine, which is a pretty wild thing that isn't really in Western interests. It's just doing it to do it, and it's, it's a little bit weird, but that is what it is. All I can say, though, is that is how the LSA was founded. That's what the LSA stands for. And I hope that a lot of people really like that, because I like to think that the LSA is an incredibly patriotic organization that completely steps up above the constant chatter that is going on in the domestic political sphere and focuses entirely on trying to improve the Republic every single day that we can, in every single way that is possible, whether it be incredibly small or whether it be something that's actually incredibly big. But still, thank you so much once again for support LSA Rocks and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. It is folks like you who help to make this thing possible and help us to keep this thing running. And if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to be here for long enough to say that the Lee Spring Army will never truly die. And so a massive thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also LSA Rocks did ask for a live chat question,
yeah.
So this one's going to go to James Bond, who said, this is just in. Eastern China is testing their siren systems on major cities for air attacks, and that's never been tested before, and thoughts on that?
It's an interesting thing that they would be testing it. It may just be something like, let's see, the United States tested out some alert system a while ago. It was a national alert system sent out on the phone. And a lot of people could have said that the United States was preparing for Armageddon at that point. It may be that the Chinese are just testing these things out. There may be nothing to get out of it. Or it may be that they're actually planning on doing something in the region, maybe against Taiwan, and they're expecting that Taiwan may start to fire missiles back at China if that was to happen. That could also be a possibility as well. So, I can't really say for sure what to make of it, because it could truly be nothing and it's just the first time they've ever conducted a test like that, or it could be something really major, like they're actually preparing for a war and they're trying to make sure that civil defense networks and systems like the air raid sirens are able to sound properly, so that way people will be able to know that they need to go and seek shelter. We don't really know. But with that, I hope that does address it well. I hope that gives at least the two likely options, that it could either be nothing or it could be something serious, because of course we can't really tell which one it is, but both of those options are somewhat likely. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Also, I saw someone say, we test our emergency alerts once a month. We do, actually. In America, we test them all out once a month. I believe it's in pretty much every single city in the country tests their emergency alert systems out the first Wednesday of every month, if I'm correct. And we run them for like a minute or so just to make sure that they're all running and they're operational, and then they shut off until the next month or until an actual emergency pops up. But still, I would say it's most likely just a test, maybe the first of its kind, but probably nothing that exceptional. But I hope that does still address that the best I can. And we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have two $20 super chats from Gunfox61, who's a channel legend. And they put in two of the history or the day in history super chats. And they said Tupolev TU4, a documentary idea, and today in history, 1519, Magellan set sail from Spain. And 1565, first European battle on American soil. And 1881, Chester Arthur becomes third president to serve in 1 year. And 2002, an avalanche thunders into Russian village. And 1777, the Redcoats kill Americans in the Paoli massacre. And in 1963, Kennedy proposes a joint mission to the moon. And 1806, the returning Lewis and Clark reach Missouri. And a question from the chat.
Hey, and thank you so much for the incredible support, Gunfox61. And once again, throwing in those incredible days in history. And today is actually a pretty interesting day in history, apparently, because, most importantly, Magellan set sail for around the world, the circumnavigation of the globe. He would never survive to make it to the end of that voyage, but it was the first of its kind, and it's a really cool one for that fact. Also, Chester Arthur is an incredibly interesting president that no one talks about. There actually was a ship that was named after him, but let me see if I can actually show you all this here, because if I remember this correctly, I think if I'm remembering this correctly, this is a picture of Chester Arthur, by the way. I believe he had some kind of a large tumor that started to grow on the right side of his face, and he had it surgically removed, but it left a pretty nasty scar. So every single time he would have like a picture portrait made of him, like an actual picture instead of a painting, he would always make sure that they did not picture the right side of his face, because there was a pretty hideous scar over there left from them removing the tumor. But still, a very interesting president that really no one talks about a lot. Not a lot is really known about him publicly, rather than he was a president. Kind of like others like Franklin Pierce, which no one knows anything about. It's like, who the hell is that guy? And he was just some dude. But there's a lot of presidents like that in American history that are just really forgettable, and he's kind of one of them, at least in the American public's opinion. And there's another guy like that no one knows about, and it's really crazy to me, Warren G. Harding. Like, this guy was just a president, and no one even knows that he was a president. And also, he wasn't really that good of a president. He had, like, the biggest scandals, like the Teapot Dome scandal happened while he was president. I would actually say, and I'm saying this for all presidents, kind of breaking the politics rule and even going into modern politics, Warren G. Harding is probably the most corrupt president that ever was president, even compared to any modern day president, if you think they were corrupt or not. This guy honestly beat him. Because the crazy thing was, and this was something that was just known, the guy allowed for the Teapot Dome oil reserves, which was a strategic oil reserve at the time that was specifically reserved for military use, he was allowing government officials to literally sell the oil out and pocket the money for themselves. Like, he knew this was going on, and he just let it happen.
Interesting. That's it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, because, you know, a lot of people these days, they always talk about like these very intricate kind of like webs of how someone might make money. And this guy literally just said, let's just rob the government blind and I'm fine with it. And he's the president of the United States, and everyone just got away with it, really. I mean, nothing really happened to anyone for it. Now, the Teapot Dome scandal thing was unveiled to the public, and it was this huge thing. But, you know, it's just kind of ended up disappearing, and everyone forgot about it, and everyone forgot about this guy. And he was like the most corrupt president ever, and no one even knows his name or what he looked like at all. And that's like the craziest freaking thing to me ever.
He said, "Oh, come on, Jack, drain the reserves and make the money, Jack. Come on."
Man, he sat there and said, it's going to be the greatest oil reserve drain ever seen. He's like, we don't need the oil. And he just saw, like, I don't know how in the hell no one would remember this guy, because everyone always goes, oh my God, so-and-so is the most corrupt president in the modern day, you know, and it's like one or the other. And it's like, do y'all not know of like the other people in the past? Like this guy was legitimately robbing the government blind. Like, it wasn't any kind of like complicated rigmarole that he was trying to do to end up making some money or something. This guy literally just robbed the government blind, and nothing happened to him. Like, that's the weirdest thing ever. But still, I hope that kind of covers that well with the whole like president thing, like unforgettable presidents. Forgettable presidents like Chester Arthur. This guy is also one of them. But still, beyond that, let's see here. 2002 avalanche thunders in the Russian village. Man, bad day for the Russians. Good day for the avalanche. 1777, redcoats kill Americans in the Paoli massacre. Massacres in the American Revolutionary War were actually very rare. That's one of the few. Because usually, even back in the day during that time, the British understood that they were trying to win the hearts and minds of the colonial public. And so massacres were pretty incredibly rare, really, on all sides. The Paoli massacre was really one that stood out from the norm, and one that really was pretty wild in its own instance. A lot of people are going to be saying, well, you say that that's not the case, but the Boston Massacre happened. The Boston Massacre was not a massacre. Like, I hate to say this, but I have to be fair here. The British soldiers fired into that crowd in self-defense. That was even found by a jury of peers in Boston, and the guy representing and defending the British soldiers was John Adams. So there's really no way that you could say that these guys were like just massacring American citizens, because one of the founding fathers literally defended them in court and found them innocent. Because they were. I mean, the people who were in the crowd were throwing clubs at these guys and rocks. Like that. And also, I'm not talking about like small rocks. I'm talking about sharp, jagged rocks that if they hit you in the head, they'd kill you pretty much. So these guys fired into the crowd largely in self-defense. So I don't really consider that a massacre. I just consider that more so kind of a thing. I mean, hell, you know, I think more people ended up getting killed at Kent State than in the Boston Massacre. So, you know, if Kent State isn't considered really a massacre or anything, although it kind of is, then this isn't really one, in my opinion. So once again, pretty rare. So that's actually a pretty interesting point in the Revolutionary War, the Pali Massacre, because they didn't really happen a lot throughout the war. So that's actually pretty wild to think that that happened on this day. And let's see here. Kennedy proposes joint mission to the moon. The missions to the moon were pretty unique. Actually, cool fact, we're actually trying to get back to the moon, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, because some people come up with these crazy conspiracy theories that there's aliens on the moon and we can't go back to the moon because the aliens threatened to kill us all if we did, which really makes no sense. Why in the world would they stop us? But anyways, people say that that's the case because NASA continuously says that we lost the technology to return to the moon. And people like scoff at that, and they're like, how in the world can you lose the technology? The reason why we lost the technology is because a lot of the people who were involved in the Saturn V program that made the Saturn Vs, that allowed us to be able to travel to the moon, ended up dying and kind of taking the knowledge with them. So while we do have all of the schematics and drawings, like no joke, yeah, this is actually true. While we have all of the schematics and drawings and everything to be able to rebuild a Saturn V, we really don't have the engineering expertise to build them one-to-one scale to a T. We would pretty much have to relearn some of the knowledge because some of the guys who had that knowledge died. And also on top of that, the machining and the tooling is not around to be able to rebuild Saturn Vs. It all got destroyed at the end of the Apollo program to be scrapped because it was going to save NASA money in the long term, and they were trying to put a decent amount of money into the space shuttle project instead. So they decided to scrap a lot of the machining and tooling used to make the Saturn Vs, so that way it could be put towards the space shuttle program. So
now, I'm not gonna lie. If there's any piece of information that would like lead anyone to believe the crazy like conspiracy alien theory, the piece of info you just said about they lost the knowledge, I'm like, I had no idea about the alien theory until tonight. You just mentioned it, but I'm like, that sounds suspicious as hell that they lost the knowledge, because everything NASA does is recorded. Because they're scientists and they record stuff. They don't just like store it in their head and like go home the next day and like, oh, I'm keeping this knowledge to myself. I don't think it works like that. So that's kind of weird.
Well, I mean, that's kind of technically how it works, because think about this. If all the people who were involved in designing and building an aircraft carrier, let's say everyone who did all the electrical work in the design of an aircraft carrier, all of them just got wiped out. Like they all died of old age, and an aircraft carrier hadn't been built for like 50 years. Technically, at that point, the knowledge has been lost. Like, knowledge can actually be lost in the modern day. It's a little bit hard, but when you're talking about really niche things, like niche technological items, like a large rocket like the Saturn V, the people who specialized in producing that tech were so few in number that if they do die, the knowledge is almost lost with them, which is actually pretty wild. And it has happened several times before. Like, for example, a lot of people don't really know how to operate. Well, here's an interesting one. This is probably the best one I can bring up. The technology of sword making from the Middle Ages, we don't really know how they did it. Like, that's actually something that's crazy. We actually don't know, because all of the metallurgy knowledge of blacksmiths at the time, while they did write pretty extensively about it, there's also a lot that just went with the blacksmiths that died with them, trade secrets and things like that. And so there are certain swords and certain metallurgical compounds in older swords from the Middle Ages that we just don't know how to recreate. We also don't really know how to recreate Roman concrete that well, because the technology was just simply lost, or really the know-how to do that was simply lost. Another thing, speaking about swords, specifically from the Middle Ages, sword fighting, the entire concept of European sword fighting is lost. Like, it's dead. Like, no one knows how that actually works. Like, it's all theory. No one actually knows what a real sword fight, according to how people would have fought at the time, would actually look like, because all of that knowledge just died with the people who had it. And while they wrote a lot about it, and there's a lot of manuals out there, we really don't know what that looked like in practice. And so people who do European martial arts, which is mostly sword fighting, they're all working with theory. They're actually not working with legitimate practice. So there are a lot of examples throughout history where people would do something quite commonly, like speak Latin, and then no one now has an idea of what Latin even sounds like, or what even Latin is supposed to properly sound like, because the knowledge was just lost. And while millions of people spoke Latin, no one knows how to speak it now, and no one knows how to fight with swords. No one knows how to make swords like they made them in the Middle Ages. And now the metallurgy that we have these days is a lot better, and you can mass produce it and everything, but still at the same time, we don't know how they did that. So technology can be lost. So that's kind of an interesting thing that a lot of people kind of like understate. They're like, there's no way that that knowledge can be lost. Knowledge can legitimately be lost, or the way to do something can be lost. Like another good example, you cannot easily build a steam locomotive in the modern day. And this is actually something that a lot of people will know if you follow the Pennsylvania Railroad T1 Trust, which is very interesting. They're trying to rebuild a locomotive, a PRR T1, and I'll show y'all one. It's a very interesting locomotive. None of these exist anymore. They were all scrapped. They were pretty cool. They were streamlined duplexes. So everyone thinks they're just like the neatest things ever, and they really are. Technically, this thing may be faster than the Mallard, which was the fastest steam locomotive ever actually recorded in history. This thing may have ended up going faster at times. But beyond that, none of these exist anymore, and the T1 Trust is trying to build a new one. And the problem is that a lot of the manufacturing knowledge and technology of the time does not exist anymore. The knowledge was literally lost. And so in some instances, they're having to go and produce some of these parts in a modern way that they know is not correct because the manufacturing principles didn't exist at the time, or the technology didn't exist at the time, but they're still having to make it that way because there's really no way to produce the locomotive in the way that it originally was, one-to-one, because that knowledge and technology has been lost to time. It's just been made obsolete, so why keep it around? So that's another example of technology or knowledge just kind of being lost to time. And that was an incredibly short time, because these things were made through the later part of World War II and on just a few years after World War II. Literally, people who saw these things running on the railroads are still alive, and yet that technology and that knowledge on how to actually manufacture these was lost somehow and had to kind of be rebuilt from the ground up.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's incredibly weird with that kind of stuff. Like, documentation of manufacturing knowledge and also technology cannot be understated, because a lot of it actually does end up getting lost to time, and no one really knows how the stuff works or how to make it. And also on top of, like the truth is that no one knows how it works or how to make it, because it's obsolete knowledge. Why do you need to know how to build a steam locomotive frame when no one's needing to use steam locomotives anymore? It's technology that's redundant or obsolete at that point. So the knowledge does get lost or forgotten, and no one really knows how to do it anymore. But still, it's important to try and remember, because if you ever wanted to go back and do it again, or replicate it, or maybe revisit it to learn something from it, it's completely lost by that point. You can't even go back and get it because no one knows how it works anymore. So yeah, actually, crazily enough, like, when you hear the standalone statement that we can't build another Saturn V because the technology and the knowledge has been lost, that sounds crazy stupid. But when you actually look at all the historical examples where that has happened, it actually seems pretty plausible at that point. So I got to tell y'all, if y'all have any knowledge or information that is kind of niche to you, and you really don't have anyone else that knows about it, or it's starting to become a bit of an obsolete trade, make sure to write it down as much as you can about it and how it actually works in practice, because one day people might look back on it and that might be some valuable, incredibly important information for someone, because a lot of it does end up just getting lost because it ends up becoming obsolete. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that rabbit hole the best I can, because the days in history are incredibly cool, and the Saturn V deal and the whole missions to the moon is an incredibly interesting one, and also Lewis and Clark returning is also really cool because they were the first to make it all the way out to the Pacific for the United States. The Spanish already had, like, they already were in, like, California and New Mexico and stuff, but we still made it out there and saw it, and that was really cool. But we did not find the Northwest Passage, but now it exists. It actually exists right up here because the ice is melting enough that ships can actually pass through it. So now, hundreds of years after Lewis and Clark tried to find it, it actually exists, crazily enough. But still, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Gunfox, and throwing in another interesting day in history. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And our next one goes to Scott, who put...
Wait, question from the chat. We have to get a question from the chat. Sorry, I keep on forgetting about those.
That's right. I forgot. A question from the chat for Gunfox61. The 2 super chats, by the way. Two chair. But this live chat question is going to go to a Rogue Knight, who says, what would a war with Iran look like?
A war with Iran, at least if we're talking about it on an American side of things, would most likely end up being a majority air war. We wouldn't really want to get dedicated with land forces inside of Iran because the terrain is incredibly mountainous and it would slow down progress a lot. We would probably just end up bombing them into oblivion and then sending ground forces when they had pretty much been decimated from the sky. That's largely, though, normal American doctrine. We believe in that to an umpth degree because superior firepower is the way to win. It's just been proven time and time again through history that going up against conventional forces, superior firepower will win every time. And so going off of that, we probably would just end up bombing them to oblivion, send in the ground forces to clean up what's left, and then end up overthrowing their government. And that would be largely what a war would look like. It might be a little bit different considering that the Iranians would probably start to use drones a lot more, but with the implementation of laser technologies here in America, drone warfare wouldn't be as successful as it's been in Ukraine because we would largely be prepared to fight against it. And also we have pretty competent modern electronic warfare systems that would also be able to disrupt most of the signals, and so they wouldn't be able to use that much for that reason either. So that's largely what a war will look like. It would be fought on our terms. We would bomb them to hell, and then we would go in and wipe out anyone that's left that would still be putting up any kind of resistance. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And Bobby said, superior firepower did not win in Vietnam. I believe you did not hear my disclaimer that that's against the conventional force. Fighting in Vietnam was not against the conventional force, because conventional forces don't dig hundreds of miles of tunnels and fight in a guerrilla warfare kind of a style. So that is actually a caveat right there. Superior firepower does not win against non-conventional forces. It always wins against the conventional force, never against a non-conventional force, because using superior firepower against a non-conventional force, you end up getting a lot of collateral, and that ends up creating a lot of animosity in local populations against the force using superior firepower, and then actually ends up bolstering support for the non-conventional force you're fighting. So a completely different thing to do there. That would be COIN, counterinsurgency operations, and that does not revolve around superior firepower. That revolves around low-intensity, asymmetrical warfare, and largely trying to win over the hearts and minds of the people in the area by trying to introduce some sort of benefits for them to be supportive of our conventional forces in the region instead of the irregular non-conventional forces that we're trying to fight against and wipe out. So I hope that does address that the best I can, because I don't believe you heard me give the caveat, so I hope that kind of gives the clarification about the different ways that you have to engage different opponents. Because conventional forces, you can always win against them with superior firepower. Non-conventional forces, you have to conduct counterinsurgency operations, which are a very different thing. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again. Go ahead.
And up next, a big shout out to Andy L, who put in a $20 donation and did not leave a comment. But thank you very much, Andy, as always, for supporting the channel, and we appreciate it. And also, we had a $20 super chat from Outdoors Delmarva, who also did not leave a comment. But thank you, Andy and Outdoors Delmarva, for that support, while I stutter over my words. But thank you both. And Enforcer, what say you?
And thank you to both of y'all. Andy L and Outdoors Delmarva for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. It is folks like you who help to make this thing possible, who help us to keep this thing running. And while y'all didn't throw in comments, the support does mean a lot and helps us to continue to make this channel possible. And so with that, huge thanks to both of y'all once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
And this one goes to Scott, who puts in a $20 donation. And Scott says, is the Free Russian Army fighting up in Kursk or in the Donbass?
The Free Russian Army is fighting in the area around Vovchansk, and from what we understand, they've been there for the entirety of the Vovchansk campaign. They're not fighting down in the Donbass or up in Kursk, from what we understand. They've pretty much been removed from most heavy fighting, and they're almost used as like a light irregular force in the Vovchansk region. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least off of the knowledge I knew. And I got to thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to be possible, and also helping us to have a very interesting question to answer right there. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Rob S., who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you, Rob, as well for that support. He said, glad you're back, and I had withdrawals.
And thank you so much for the support, Rob S. And I'm glad to hear that you're happy to have us back. It was a long time off stream, from the 14th to the 18th. That's an entire 4 days that we were off air. And it really was interesting to be off air for that long, because I actually ended up getting withdrawals from running the show, because we were on a vacation, we were having fun and everything, but after a while, I was like, man, I really just want to get back to running a show, because I enjoy doing it. I love getting to talk about the news. I love getting to talk to all of y'all. I wouldn't replace it with really anything else to do in the world, and so I was fiending to get back on the show, and so I'm glad I'm back too, Rob S., and I'm glad that all of y'all came back as well, because we're getting viewership now like we were before we left, and we were kind of scared that wasn't going to be the case. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. We wouldn't be able to make it possible now, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. So a huge thanks to you, because no one has to support the channel if they don't want to, yet nevertheless, y'all have continued to make it y'all's mission to support this channel and help us to keep this thing on the air, and y'all are the only reason that y'all have made this thing possible. And so big thanks to you once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one's going to go to JR Does Stuff, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, JR, for that support. And he said, hi guys, I wish I knew you were coming out to LA, and I would have given you a real tour of LA from a native, and Matt would have had fun. And glad you liked Burbank, because that's where I live, and I hope you come back and take a live chat question. And JR, we only had 1 day in LA, only one very short day, and it was interesting. We took this the tour bus around the place, and they drove through, like, I think the nice areas of LA, up toward Hollywood, and then out towards Santa Monica, and also Beverly Hills. So it was pretty cool little tour on that one. Excuse me, but I would have been very fascinated to see a real quote unquote tour of LA and see the other parts of it as well. And if we had the time, we would have done that if we would have known. So thank you very much for the support and also the offer as well. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say, thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I also gotta say, I wish we could have let everyone know what we were doing and where we were going. The problem with that is, and I have to explain this a little bit, because I don't want y'all to think that we weren't like wanting to talk to any of y'all or say hello. Well, I would have honestly loved to have told y'all everything that we were going to be doing. Problem is the hot dog man's people, like, just being entirely honest and kind of explaining with y'all, because the whole FSB hit list thing, like, that is what it is. You know, they could get us at any time, like, they could get us while we're in the house. So telling them where we are and what we're doing doesn't really matter, because the truth is they know where we are almost 9 out of 10 times, because we're here at this house. So, you know, that wasn't really the big concern. Big concern is hot dog people, because the hot dog people have time and time shown again that they're more than willing to put our lives at risk and possibly get us injured or killed if possible, through their antics and actions, like trying to call up our law school when we were going to law school and telling them that we had gats in the car and we were getting ready to go in there and start greasing people. They legitimately tried to do that. And if it wasn't for me going to the police station on that campus that day and tipping them off about what I had heard about what they were doing, they would have probably sent the SWAT team in to that school that day, and who knows how that could have gone. There could have been a really nervous, trigger-happy SWAT team member, and one of us could have gotten shot or something. You don't know. And that's kind of why we couldn't tell anyone anything about it, because if I said, oh, we're getting on a plane, you would bet your money that one of those people would have been calling up the TSA and saying that we were transporting drugs across the country or something to try and get us in trouble with the TSA. Although we weren't doing anything like that, they would have sure as hell tried to make a false report like that. And then once we landed in LA, they would be trying to just give us hell wherever we were going down there. They would be trying to figure out anything and everything they could do to try and make the entire trip miserable. That's what they do. And so that's why we couldn't really tell anyone what was going to be going on and what was going to be happening, because those people are hell-bent on making sure that they can try and harass us at just about every single step of the way. And so we couldn't tell anyone anything because we told y'all about it because we were wanting to, say hello to all of y'all, maybe even meet some of y'all along the way. Those people would have been just on the exact same side of the coin, trying to make sure that our lives were as miserable as possible while we were supposed to be having fun on this trip. So that's kind of why we weren't able to tell anyone. I wish we could have, though, because there are so many of y'all that were living in places that we went, like LA, Burbank, like Klamath Falls. There was actually like a couple of folks in here last night that said they were living in Klamath Falls, and the train actually passed through there. We didn't have a lot of time to get off the train once it started because it only had like fresh air breaks in some areas for like 15 minutes. So it's not like enough time to get off the train and go wander around town or anything. But that's kind of why we couldn't say anything about it. Does that annoy us a lot? It does, but it's kind of like the life we have to live with, the fact of things, because that sick guy and his sick community have made sure to really ensure us that we have to look out for security first and foremost, because if we don't, they're going to make sure to make our lives hell for no reason rather than they just dislike us or, some stupid thing like that. And some people... Let's see here. Some people are saying, who is Hot Dog Man? The name will never be mentioned. We never mention the name of that idiot because that's what they're looking for, is to get into fights with people so that way they can get their name mentioned on someone else's show. And in their mind, they think that that'll help them to grow their channel because they suck so bad at running their YouTube channel. They can't gain subscribers organically. They actually lose subscribers organically over the course of time. So they have to end up getting in drama with other people and getting shout outs that way to get any kind of growth for their channel. Do I like that that's the way they work things? No, because that's not really how I work things on our side of things. I just do things because we like to do them. But considering that they work on that kind of a level, I'm not going to let them win on that kind of a level. So that's kind of why we couldn't say anything about it. But beyond that, I still thank you so much for wanting to give us a tour. And hopefully we will be able to come back, because I have a plan on returning back out west someday. Don't know when. But if I do, I do want to have a look around Burbank and the rest of LA, because we only got to see Hollywood, which was kind of rough. We got to see West LA, which was kind of rough. And then we got to see Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, which were incredibly nice. So we kind of got to see the best and worst of both worlds. So with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible, help us to keep it rolling. And of course, it is folks from around the world, also all across America, that help the LSA to continue to be a reality. And I got to thank you a big part, once again, for being a little part of this, actually a big part of it, and helping us to make this thing possible each and every day. And so with that, huge thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And we will make sure to take a live chat. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so this live chat goes to Defender Marcia, who says, what is going on in Jordan? And talk about being between a rock and a hard place.
And they are in between a rock and a hard place. But before I get on to that, sorry, Matthew, I didn't actually see that message until right then when you started reading that off. Matthew is going to have to get off a little bit early tonight. I'll let you decide when that is, Matthew. I don't know when you want to get off, whether it's right now or a little bit from now. But Matthew is feeling a little rough, so he's going to be hopping off a little bit early tonight. He ended up catching a little bit of a bug somewhere on the trip. So I wish, of course, I hope everyone wishes him the best. He's been doing an incredible job being a trooper and moving on through it both last night and tonight. But he does need a little bit of rest because he's not at 100%. So Matthew, do you want to get off right now, or do you want to get off a little bit later?
I think I'm going to have to hop off right now because my brain's not really functioning, and also like I'm just feeling totally out of it, and also my you can probably hear my voice too. It's not quite sounding right. But anyways, I'm going to hop off early, folks. But I'll see you all again tomorrow, and maybe we'll have a short video out tomorrow as well. But whatever the case is, we'll power through whatever the sickness is. It's nothing crazy, but I don't want to overdo it and overexert myself and then get worse. That's what I don't want to happen. So with that, folks, I'll see you all tomorrow. And thank you all for another great stream tonight. And thank you all once again for the support and kind words. And also thank you all for the get well wishes soon. And with that, Enforcer, I'll let you take it from here.
All right, and goodbye to Enforcer Matt right there. Hopefully he'll be back and at it tomorrow, feeling better than ever. We can only hope. But getting back to your question, Defender Marcia, what is going on in Jordan? Jordan is in a very interesting position. Jordan is Western aligned 100%. All of their weaponry is largely provided by the West, by the United Kingdom and the United States. Jordan is trying to deal with things. I don't really know how to explain it, because they want to try and help out the Palestinian people, but also being a part of the American sphere, they're kind of in the same group that Israel is in, so they end up having to work for collective defense in the area. So the best way I can explain it is that ideologically they like the Palestinians, but for security and economic reasons, they end up aligning with Israel and defending them against attacks from proxy forces. That would be the best way I could explain that at the moment, because there really is no better way to explain it, rather than getting into like this massive rabbit hole about the history of Jordan and what they've been doing over like the past 100 years or so. But still, a huge thanks to you once again, Defender Marcia, for asking a really interesting question, and a huge shout out to JR Does Stuff for sponsoring that live chat and helping this channel to keep on running. And moving on from that, we also got a $20 super chat from Butchie the Crouton. Hey! And Butchie didn't throw in a comment, but Butchie is an old guard of this channel. And I got to thank you so much once again for being an old guard of this channel and being here with us tonight and helping us to keep this thing running. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. We wouldn't have been able to be here for 940 days so far. And I've got to thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running, helping us to make this thing possible. Because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to be here for as long as we have been. We wouldn't have been able to be here for the first month, and much less whichever month this is. This is probably like the 30th month at this point, and we wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't thanks to folks like you. And so a massive thanks to you once again. While you didn't throw in a comment, that support means a lot, especially coming from a legend like you. And with that, thank you once again. And moving on from that, we got a super chat from Merry Christmas, the shitter's full. Hey! And Merry Christmas, the shitter's full said, here's to the second moon being an alien craft. And that's a pretty fun one. We actually got technically a second moon today. It's an asteroid that ended up entering our orbit, which is kind of cool. But I will say, it is 100% a Tyranid spacecraft. It is a Tyranid hive fleet that is coming to the Earth to eat us all and use us for biomass. It's incredibly unfortunate to hear. Hopefully we can get the Ultramarines in on this, and hopefully they will be able to save the day. Because, of course, we all know that the greatest savior of humanity is the Blue Boys of Robote Guilliman. And so with that, thank you once again. I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. Merry Christmas. The shitter's full. You always throw in these very interesting super chats, and tonight is no exception, of course. And so, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from Steve T. Hey! And Steve T threw in a 20, and he said, if you were having to pick a fast food restaurant for a date, what Olive Garden or Burger King or other option would you choose, and why? That's actually a very interesting question, Steve T, because taking someone to a restaurant on a first date is a very important thing, and there has to be a good restaurant to pick. It has to have good food, but it can't be too expensive because no one's wanting to break the bank because the first date may not go well. So going off of that, I would say a decent pick, like out of the two, Burger King or Olive Garden. Olive Garden, in my opinion, is the better pick because it just has a more refined feel than Burger King. Burger King, you know, is like bottom rung fast food. You don't want to take anyone there. Although, you know, budget wise, it may be cheaper. But beyond that, it's not always about the budget. I would say though, if you had to pick a restaurant, Italian food, usually everyone likes Italian food. Mexican food's also pretty good. So you could go to a Mexican restaurant or an Italian restaurant, maybe even a mom and pop shop restaurant that isn't a chain, and you could usually end up getting a pretty good result off of that. Usually everyone likes Mexican and Italian food. So if I had to give any dating advice, which, you know, I may or may not be qualified to answer that, I would say that probably Mexican or an Italian restaurant, that isn't incredibly pricey, but it's, it's an okay price with good food or maybe even good portions, and that would probably be a good pick. So with that, I hope that does address it well. Or Andrea Scout actually brought up a really good point. Or you can cook food for them, which is usually a very big compliment. That is honestly a pretty good recommendation, especially if you can cook good. That would actually be a pretty good move. And I see a lot of people throwing in a whole bunch of options here. In-N-Out is good for dates. Oh, I don't know about that. Maybe like a casual date after a couple. I wouldn't say that would be good for a first date. Not McDonald's. Cody Hernandez, you're going to there will be no second date with a McDonald's. No. Because we were laughing at someone a while ago. This was years ago, but I remember this story. We were all talking about, this was kind of in a group I was in. I'm not going to say which group, but we were all talking about someone who was in the group, and someone brought up, they're kind of redneck because they took a girl they liked on a date to Captain D's. Like, who the hell thinks the good first date spot is Captain D's? Like, that makes no sense. Like, you want to give them indigestion and dysentery? Like, that's not a good first date idea. Don't bring someone to Captain D's for a first date. That makes no sense. So cooking's pretty good, though. Like, cooking for them is great. Honestly, like, dishes that I don't think would do bad would be like a bolognese. Bolognese are pretty good. If you can cook those, they're pretty easy to do, and they taste really good. Nothing really spicy because you don't know if they like things that are spicy or bland yet. So go for something that has like some zest to it, but don't go for like anything too spicy or too bland, something a little bit down the middle. That would be pretty decent. Fish tacos are pretty good. They're pretty easy to cook up too. So you could do like fish tacos. That wouldn't be a bad one. But yeah, as long as you can cook good, and it's like a simple thing, that would be a pretty good option. Or taking them to a nice, well, like not a high class like Italian or Mexican restaurant, but like a middle ground in between like bottom rung and top rung, kind of a Mexican or Italian restaurant. That would be a pretty decent safe bet as well if you were wanting to take someone somewhere for a first date, kind of an option. And once again, to explain why, because I don't think I explained why too well. It is not too expensive, so it fits within the budget criteria, because you don't know if there's going to be a second date, so you don't want to go all out and like give someone a really free expensive meal, because that does happen. You also want to make sure that it's something that everyone can like. Generally, Mexican and Italian food are commonly liked by pretty much everyone, so you can always count that those will be safe bets. And if you cook for them, not only can you assure the quality of the food if your cooking is good, but you can also make it a very special gesture, because cooking for someone is usually a really special thing. It shows that you really care about them and you would like to go through the effort to actually cook for them, and usually that's very special for the person receiving that. So either take them to an Italian or Mexican restaurant or cook for them. Those would be my three options that I'd go with. Also, I saw someone say that Captain D's out here got shut down for safety reasons. Now, that's what should happen to all of them. I'm honestly in the camp that Captain D's are horrendous, like across the board. I've never seen a Captain D's that's actually good, and all of them have ended up giving my family food poisoning that anyone's ever eaten from. So Captain D's got ruled out for everyone everywhere in my family, like never again. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. I thank you for the support, Steve T, and helping this channel to keep on running. I also thank you for asking for dating advice. I don't know why you need that advice, but I hope it helps a little bit. I'm not like the ultimate like be all know all on that kind of a thing, like it's kind of something that everyone's got to sort out on their own. But I hope that it helps you out just a little bit, because if it helps someone out, I hope then it's done good. And so I hope that helps a little bit. Also another thing to do on a first date is just ask a lot of questions. It's pretty much an interview. Like, I don't know. I don't know, Steve T. Maybe you've dated before, or maybe you're just asking because you're curious. But just in case if someone has not dated here before, let me make sure to give some good tips. Never go on a date and like not ask questions. You want to make sure to ask a lot of questions, because you may find out that you're not really compatible on the first date. And also, someone said I'm a basement dweller. I'm not a basement dweller. It's just that I never want to say this kind of stuff with confidence, because what works for me may not work for others. But ask a lot of questions. It is literally an interview pretty much to find out if both of y'all are going to be compatible or not. So ask a lot of questions, like what is your plan in life? Like really like ask big term questions. Like, it's perfectly fine to ask those, Like, don't immediately plan on like marrying someone on the first date. That's insane. Like, that's crazy behavior. Don't do that. Ask a whole lot of questions. Be like, so like, let's say hypothetically, you got married with someone. What would your goals be if you got married to someone? And see what they say, because you may have an entirely different plan for the future than this person has, and you may find out that in the long term, while in the short term y'all seem relatable, in the long term y'all aren't really compatible. And if y'all aren't really compatible in the long term, there's really no point in dragging it out, because you can go on multiple dates, you can have a fine time in the short term, and you can kid yourself that it will work out in the long term. But if the long term goals are not compatible, it doesn't matter how similar the short term goals were, because in the long term it's going to fall apart. So the first date should always be more of an interview than anything. The other dates, the second and third dates, and all of those dates beyond that, are the dates where that it's going to largely work out, or at least y'all are on the same page on most things, and then you can get into joking around and having a lot more fun on the dates, and really just kind of getting to know them as a person, instead of kind of asking them all the questions you need to know to figure out if y'all are even compatible on a base level or not. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Also, Quantifier said, just be yourself. It is really important to just be yourself and stay true to yourself. Like, if they ask you a question, like, don't lie to them. Like, don't feel embarrassed about who you are, because they're going to have to live with who you are, and they're going to find it out eventually. Like, if you like trains, like some people may not like trains, or some people may think that's dorky, but if you're going to plan on dating someone and eventually marrying them, which usually is the end goal of most people, or not, if you're one of those people, you just end up like really just dating someone long term and kind of marrying them, but not officially. You got to tell them this stuff. They're going to find out about it eventually, and you don't want to be dishonest to them. So tell them everything about yourself. Like, tell them, you watch the Enforcer channel. It's like a regular thing you do every single night. Like, because they kind of need to know this stuff. They're going to be with you for a while, so it's good to be upfront and honest with them, because that kind of honesty kind of lays out the framework for everyone to get a better understanding of each other, to communicate with each other, to figure out, is this really going to work or not, to even go on a second or a third date and then go on beyond that. Also, one more thing, if they are giving you flack, just drop it and move on. That goes for everyone, women and men. Like, if you're dating someone, or you went on a date with someone and they don't really seem to be that into you, cut your losses and move on. They're not really going to be into you much ever. It's never going to work out that way. So don't sit there and kid yourself and be like, oh, maybe if I try harder, they'll like me more. Nah, they won't. Like, I promise you they won't. Like, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that. A lot of people sometimes like to think that they can make it work, but the honest truth is that most likely the chances are that it really doesn't. So don't sit there and try and like kid yourself into a false sense of hope. Usually that ends up getting you crushed even worse. So just, if you see that someone isn't really into you, just cut your losses and move on. You weren't missing anything in the first place. You were just missing a whole bunch of grief in the end. So just, go out there and go try it with someone else. And then maybe it'll work, or maybe it won't. The dating is full of successes and failures. You can always end up dating someone, like you can date someone and think that they're really cool and really like them, and they like you, but then the work schedules never line up. Like, you work late at night, they work in the middle of the day, so there's really not a lot of free time that you share to be able to hang out, and neither one can really give up free time, so you just have to kind of end up chalking it up and move on. That kind of happens, and while it's sad, and while it would have been great for it to work out, it just doesn't. You can't really, you can feel sad about it, but you can't really mull on it too long and try and make the inevitable collapse work, because it won't. So I hope that helps with like dating advice. That would be my advice. And once again, while a lot of that advice works for me, it may not work for you. Just figure it out as you go along. That kind of a thing is something that has to be learned by experience. So sometimes you have to go and fall and get up to be able to learn. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least as far as I would know. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, Steve T. Thank you so much for giving support. I feel like I gave like the most in-depth answer I could, and also before we move on, because I don't have the spreadsheet where I can actually load stuff into it, I'm going to be addressing some of the smaller super chats before we move on. Quantum Fighter threw in a 70 Swedish kroner, which I think is about $5. And Quantum Fighter said, love what you do. Wiki, Google, both my 03/5 Swedish P7 South Scanian Regiment armor. I was a gunner in the Stridsvågen 90, and last week I got a call to Hernvarnet. Bada boom. And also, I will pull that up. That actually seems pretty cool. 03-5 Swee Keys 7. And so let me see here. Dang, when I pull it up, it gives me nothing. But I will believe you on that, Quantum Fighter. And I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And I got to thank you so much once again. Because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing a reality. Sadly, I can't pull it up, though, but I do know what the Stridsvågen is, and it's beautiful, and I hope that you had fun out there getting to blow stuff up. And still with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is another $5 super chat from Steve T. And Steve T said, man, anyone coming in now would be so confused, so in-depth for off-topic. Yeah, it kind of was, but I don't ever want to, like, leave anything like that, and just like leave it hanging, because that question seemed like it had a little bit behind it, and I was like, maybe I should, expound a little bit more and give some helpful tips, because it's not about war. I mean, it's about dating, but if I can give any helpful tips with that, I would be fine to help out with that too, because everyone isn't in the middle of a war. A lot of y'all are just here watching at home, and some of y'all may be having things to do with that. And some of y'all, a lot of y'all are probably really experienced with that, or don't have to worry about that because y'all are married. Or some people, like in my age bracket, which make up about 3% of the channel's viewership, are getting into dating kind of for the first time, maybe, or maybe they've only had a little bit of experience. So anything that could be said that I've learned a little bit could probably help folks out. But to be honest, I heard some of that stuff, and then you learn on your own anyways. So that is what it is. It is like don't put too much into it. Never put too much into it. But if you can ever help give good advice to anyone else, make sure to do that, because maybe they will listen to it, or they won't initially, and then they'll end up doing the very thing you told them not to do, and then they'll end up making the mistake and learning from it, and then largely following the rest of your advice. That's largely how it goes for most people. But with that, and also Rob Keefe said, nothing is off limits except politics. That's exactly it. Like the question segment, we can literally talk about anything and everything in the question segment. So if someone wanted to talk about dating, I'll talk about that in great depth. I'll make a whole rabbit hole on it, because the question segment is literally y'all's segment. We can talk about anything and everything y'all want to talk about, and there is no limit at all. And so let's see. That's it. Very bad to say. Married and war is sometimes alike. Maybe so. I have not been married before, so I would not know. And let's see. Someone said, where in the world do you even get a date? I got a date at the gun range one time. I just ran into a girl there. She was like shooting guns, and we went on a couple of dates. That didn't work out though, but that was like for scheduling reasons. That was like the example I brought up, where I work at night, they work in the day, so we really don't have like compatible time. So that's kind of why it didn't work out. But yeah, that was interesting. That was interesting learning experience right there. Beyond that, nothing bad. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about them. They were very nice, very sweet. Problem was the work schedules, and there's really no way to figure that out. Like, if they're working in the day and I'm working at night, there's really not a lot to do there. So with that, I hope that does address it well. I hope that kind of answers that a little bit well, or fairly well at least. But anyways, with that, we are moving on to the next one, which is a $20 super chat from Eric Seinstricker. And Eric Seinstricker said, love the show and glad you made it to the PNW on the train. And take one from the chat. And thank you so much for the support, Eric, in helping this channel to keep on running. And I would have to say, it was great to go out there to the West Coast and ride the train. Like, it was a real trip and an experience. And I would do it again, honestly. I would. Like, the Coast Starlight was great. The food was great. The roomettes were wonderful. The scenery was impressive. And you didn't have to do any of the driving. And that was really the nice part, is that you weren't having to focus on the road. You were actually getting to focus on what was around you and really get to enjoy it. And so I got to say, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for giving us a big welcome out there to the West Coast. It was the first time we had ever been there. And I think I'm going to go back one day. It was really nice. It was really neat. And with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and helping us to keep this thing running. because it is folks like you who helped me make this thing possible. And I got to give a huge shout out to everyone who's in the LSA from the West Coast. Y'all live a very different yet very interesting life. And it's a very interesting sliver of the United States, of this incredible republic, a completely different culture that exists out there. Not for bad or for good. It's just different, and it is very interesting to see because it's very different than what we're used to down here in Alabama. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $10 super chat from Greg Carmen. And Greg Carmen said, had to agree with my Canadian friends, missed the Ukrainian national anthem. And I thank you for the support, Greg Carmen. And we will be bringing the Ukrainian national anthem back tomorrow. And also, when we finally get our finalized new intro with the Armed Forces medley, we will be saving Bayraktar due to popular demand, but it's not going to be in the final part of the segment. It's going to be in the midway part. So Bayraktar will be saved. We'll be getting rid of Porin Brothers Crystal Balls, which is the one that plays in the middle right now, and it'll be replaced with Bayraktar instead. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And I thank you so much once again for support, Greg Carmen, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I have been hearing y'all with that. And we will be bringing back the Ukrainian anthem. And we also will be saving Bayraktar because so many people love it. And I like it too. I think it's really good. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And also, let's see. Some people are saying, I'm seeing some interesting stuff because a lot of people are still on the whole dating side of things, I think. And so, let's see. Quantum Fire said, I'm clipping your dating advice. It's good. Oh, thanks. Let's see here. Someone said stay single. I don't know. Like that. Some people like being single. Some people are introverted like that. Some people aren't. It really depends. Me personally, I think it is better to have someone out there that you can kind of like count on or lean on a little bit. Not anyone though. Like let me make that clear. Like don't just go find anyone and everyone that you can. Like, that's kind of stupid, and you will end up running into a whole bunch of problems with that. Find someone that you like, though. Like, someone that you actually click with, and someone that isn't crazy. There's a lot of crazy people out there in the world, all right? There's a lot of crazy guys out there. There's a lot of crazy girls out there. You got to find someone that is not crazy, that you actually like, and you click with. And that's something that a lot of people get wrong. And sometimes they get that wrong because they're being misled by the other person. But it is something worth saying that if you find someone you really click with and they're not crazy and you really like them, it is actually something worthwhile and it's something actually enjoyable. But if you kind of go out there and you just kind of let me see how to put it, kind of like casually dating, like you'll just date anyone long term that gives you the time of day, you're going to run into a lot of problems because you're not really vetting these people, and they could be crazy people, and there's a high chance that if you're doing that, those people are crazy, like they probably are. So you gotta be careful with that, and that's also why you don't want to go into things too quickly either. Because if you go into things too quickly, you could find out they're crazy a little bit too late, and by that point, bad things could have happened. So you want to make sure to be careful about that kind of stuff. Always be careful with people who are moving a little bit too quickly, because those people are probably crazy. It's perfectly fine to have reservations about someone. And to not want to move quickly. Like if really, to be honest, if you're looking for kind of like a long-term relationship and someone is offering to sleep with you on the first date, probably most likely crazy, because they've probably done that multiple times and they get attached a little bit too quickly. They might be obsessive. So, that's a red flag right there. In my opinion, that's how I work it. That would be a red flag to me. So, I would avoid that. Just putting that out there. That's what I would say. You gotta be observant of red flags like that. Like if they start getting attached a little bit too much, a little bit too quickly, that is honestly a red flag. Like you don't even know each other yet. Like you gotta give it time. Like in the first few dates, yeah, sure, it's a relationship, but y'all are still trying to get to know each other. So you got to give it time, before you really get like invested and dedicated to it, because you could start to see red flags popping up. And then if you're really invested and dedicated and they really rushed you into being invested and dedicated, you really can't leave at that point easily. And then that ends up becoming a problem. So I hope that does kind of like cover that a little bit better. But marriage is not bad. Like, marriage is not bad. There's a lot of people out there who really do care and love for each other. It's not always rainbows and sunshine. You know, life isn't like that. Life has its ups and downs, and marriage will have its ups and downs too. It just matters that you actually love the person you're with and you actually want to get through it with them. Because if those two things are there, then everything will be fine, and it actually will be a good experience. If you marry someone quickly and you didn't really, you know, observe the signs, or you really didn't uphold yourself to the standards, or y'all didn't have common standards, it will be hell on earth. That's a guarantee. And so with that, I hope that does address that. Well, also another thing, one more thing I have to say: don't be an asshole. Like, don't be one. Don't sit there and give everything and let them give nothing in return. And don't sit there and give nothing and expect them to give everything. Relationships are a two-way street. It's never on one party to do everything or the other to do everything. It's really on both. You can't sit there and just have it to where in the relationship one person has everything and the other one gets nothing. That's an incredibly imbalanced relationship. It won't last. You end up having, you have to be fair. You have to compromise on things. You know, you may not want to, but you have to. You have to be fair. If you're not fair, or if the other person isn't fair, that is not going to work. Cut your losses and get out of there. All right, if you're the person who's expecting to get everything, you need to reanalyze things, because you can't. You will never make a relationship work if you're receiving everything. Maybe you can, like the people have, but that isn't a good relationship. You know, so. With that, I hope I've covered all the bases on that. I feel like I've covered every single base that I can. And a lot of people are coming in here and they're like, what the hell's going on? I don't know. This conversation picked up, and I hope that I was able to kind of give some input. So with that, I hope that does address that well. What in the world is going on in the chat? Hang on, hold up. Let's see here. All right, see you, Patrick. Someone said, imagine someone giving dating advice while showing a map of Gettysburg from the Civil War. I mean, hell, man, it worked for me. Like, it worked for me. So, you know, I cope, I guess. I don't know. I don't know why you're so bitter. I guess you never got a date, but cope and seethe. I don't know. Like, that's on you, man. That's not on me. But anyways, moving on from that. And on into the next one. We got a $10 super chat from Tyler Morton. Hey! And Tyler said, I've noticed on videos, Ukrainian rifles have no scopes, sights, lasers, etc. Wouldn't they inflict far more casualties for the buck from that kind of U.S. foreign aid? Kinda, sort of. It really depends. Because with most Ukrainian engagements, with small arms, the engagement distance is actually incredibly small, like way smaller than it's ever normally been conventionally. Most firefights nowadays for the Ukrainians are occurring at ranges less than 200 yards. Historically, especially in U.S. fighting doctrine, most firefights occur in between around the range of 400 yards, which means that an optic like a Trichon ACOG with a 4 times magnification would be very effective at that kind of a distance. But for the Ukrainians fighting at 200 meters, it actually ends up being a bit of an obstacle to be able to use that properly. Red dots are usually the only optic that we see the Ukrainians using these days. Because it's a 1 times magnification optic, it really just helps out with getting a sight picture a little bit easier, although I think iron sights are honestly better at that kind of a range. So that may be why we don't really see a lot of optics. They may simply not need them because the engagement distances are so small. They're also very small because usually they get dropped off by an APC right on the tree line, and then they end up moving in. And so sometimes they're literally point blank in the trenches. So you don't even need an optic at all. You can really just point and shoot without aiming that much. And we see a lot of Ukrainians doing that in the trench fighting videos that we get. So I hope that does address that the best I can, Tyler. That's probably the best answer I could give, because I just don't really think optics are a necessity in this kind of a modern fighting that we're seeing in Ukraine. In other conflicts, it certainly was, and it was a major benefit for the United States and most Western countries to introduce optics like that. But in Ukraine, with the kind of average firefight distances that we're seeing these days of less than 200 yards, it wouldn't make much sense to issue them optics or to give them optics in large numbers and absorb a lot of cost in doing that. It wouldn't really produce any kind of it wouldn't even really produce a negligible benefit. I wouldn't really see it producing a benefit. I actually see it producing a detriment of a sort. But still, with that, I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is actually a $10 super chat from Tracy Hessels, a 10 from Destiny Edgington, and a huge shout out to both of y'all for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. Both of y'all help this channel to be possible and help us to keep this thing running. While y'all didn't throw in comments, the support does mean a lot. And if it wasn't for both of y'all being here and supporting this channel each and every night, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. And so a massive thanks to y'all once again. A huge thanks, because if it wasn't for y'all, we wouldn't be able to be here right now getting to run this thing, baby. And so with that, thank y'all massively. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $10 from Pete from Texas. And Pete from Texas, hello to Texas, by the way, said, do y'all have any news on a cargo ship that was lost, that has lost steering near Norway? Its cargo is 20,000 tons of ammonium nitrate. From what I understand, it's trying to get to Russia through the Baltic Sea. LSA, and long live the LSA. And actually, I don't have any information on that ship right now, Pete from Texas. Sadly, that would fall mostly under maritime news, which we don't really cover that much on this channel, unless if it's in the Black Sea. So that largely would have been out of my periphery for news coverage. But that is really interesting here. And ammonium nitrate, I believe, is a fairly volatile kind of a cargo. So hopefully they don't run into trouble up there. I would assume they're probably in the North Sea or the Norwegian Sea. But if they're in the North Sea, that's not a good place to be. The North Sea is pretty violent most times of the year. Oh, that would be rough. But still, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. It is folks like you who help to make this channel possible and help us to keep this thing running. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And thank you for making this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one. Also, before we move on to the next one, Quantum Fighter said this: I'm a 41-year-old and a well-versed man. Is still having free living fun. A marriage still seems like a pain. I'm a Bill Maher guy. Clipping that too. Don't be an asshole. Well, the reason why I say that, the whole "don't be an asshole" thing, is because being an asshole is like such a normal thing in the modern world. In like the dating sphere, it's really weird how that works, because people back in the day used to be assholes a little bit, like, you know, like I'm talking about like back in the boomer days. Like that's kind of where it started to pop up a little bit, and it of course existed before that too. I mean, you know, there's just ugly people out there, but nowadays it's really like a prevalent thing. Like you either like you have like two camps out there these days. You have the women who say that, you know, like they don't need no man, and then they try and get one, but then they treat them like shit. And then you have like the dudes who do like the whole alpha male thing, and then they treat all the women like shit. And it's like one camp or the other doing it to the other group, and they make it really tough for reasonable people out there to get into the dating scene, because you end up dealing with these people on either side, like the women dealing with the men, and the men are into that alpha male stuff, and they treat women like shit, and they want everything and give nothing in return. Or you deal with the women who say that they don't need a man, but still they want one for some reason, and then they treat you like shit and they want everything. And it's a really kind of a tough world out there. Like I feel like a lot of people, much like I say with America, should stop listening to this extremist stuff on either side and understand that you're dealing with other people on the other side. And much like you would want to be treated well and get things from someone, you should be giving things in return, because everything is always a two-way street, especially when you're dealing with people, and especially when you're dealing with someone that you're planning on getting in a serious relationship with. You ought to be able to give them a modicum of respect, much like you're expecting from them. And that's something that certainly doesn't exist on a mainstream anymore in the modern day. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are moving on to the next one, which is, interestingly enough, a $5 super chat from a legend, CK Bold. Hey! And CK Bold said, take a live chat question, and you know we will. And so we are going to move on up and grab a live chat question, which will go to Mick. And Mick said, what do you think Russia will do when Ukraine develops and uses its own long-range missiles? They're probably going to do nothing, because they haven't really done anything with their drone forces. The Ukrainians have been slamming the Russians with drones, and the Russians haven't really been able to do much in response. So if the Ukrainians domestically produce and use their own missiles, the response will probably be the same that they had to the Ukrainian drones, which will really be nothing. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. It will hopefully kind of explain that, because with Western weaponry, it could be a little different, but with Ukrainian-made weaponry, there's really nothing the Russians can do, because that was made in-house, used in-house against the Russians in a legitimate war. So not really a lot that could come out of that in terms of collateral. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Zakat Slonka. Hey! And Zakat Slonka said, the mayor of Tver Oblast, where Torpets was, said there were 13 injuries and 0 casualties because of the explosion. Probably most blatant Russian lie, and it is 100% a blatant lie. There's no way that only 12 people were injured. The entire ammunition depot blew up. He's probably talking about people in the city getting injured, and probably not the munitions depot, because the munitions depot and the barracks got leveled. We are suspecting that everyone may be dead or wounded in that facility at the moment, so that is a blatant Russian lie right there. That's probably one of the worst ones I've heard so far, to be entirely honest. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running and helping this thing to keep on rolling, because it is folks like you who helped make this thing possible. And also someone said, LOL, tax advice up next? Listen, if someone super chats and asks it as a question, tax advice could be up next. I'm not really a tax expert though. I'm not really a dating expert either. So, take my advice with a grain of salt. This is just what I kind of work my world on. But y'all do you. It's America. It's a free country. And really, if you're not in America, it's the Western world. It's a free world. Y'all can do whatever y'all wish. But if you want to hear my advice and maybe take a thing or two from it, be my guest. Y'all probably know more than me, though, on some of these things like taxes and dating. Most of y'all probably been around the block a little bit more than me on both of those things. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, hopefully fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Christopher Anderson. Hey! And he said, hey, bud, I'm in Ukraine. Just going to say something. Feels different. Thank you for giving the news here. Much appreciated, and thank you. And thank you so much, Christopher. I hope you're having a safe time in Ukraine. Hope things are going well over there, because it's always a little bit dangerous. Out there in Ukraine, of course, with the ongoing Russian air raids that are always going on. But I hope that things are going well, and I thank you so much for enjoying the news coverage that we make. We do this 6 days a week, every single day of the week, except for Mondays, same time every night. And I'm so happy to know that we're always able to provide the news to each and every one of y'all. And I feel prouder and prouder about that the more days that pass and the closer we get to day 1000. I've been doing this for 3 years now. That's an incredibly long time. I was doing this when I was 19 years old, which is wild. That's actually crazy. No, actually, I had just turned 20. I had literally turned 20 when the war in Ukraine started. It was about a week after my birthday. And that is crazy to think I've been doing that since then. And I'm still doing it now. I'm about to turn 23 in a couple of months, and I'm still here. And I got to say, a huge thanks to you so much for enjoying it. I've been more than happy to do this for almost 3 entire years. And if it goes on for another 6 years or 9 years that we're on this channel and running it, I'll be more than happy to go the full length of being able to run this thing and tell you all of the news that's going on around the world. Because I've never been more honored and more proud to do anything in my life rather than this. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. Hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Bobo Vasquez. Hey! And Bobo said, welcome back from your vacation. And thank you so much for the welcome back. I'm so happy to be back. It was a great vacation, an incredibly fun one, but I'm always happy to be back and always happy to be here telling you all the news. And so a huge thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping it keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, Bobo, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and keep this thing running. And also, thank you for saying that I'm wise beyond wise beyond your ears. I don't think I am. Honestly, like with the whole, if you're saying that about the dating advice thing, I feel like that ought to be like common knowledge. It's not like extreme. It's just kind of like a down the middle take. It's not a normal take these days. Usually people go down the extremes one way or the other, but I usually just try and go with things that I think are reasonable, things that are sensible. I hope that these things sound good when I say them, because you know, it's legitimate advice. I'm hoping it helps people. There's not a lot of people that need help here. I mean, hell, most everyone's in like their 40s and 50s and 60s. Y'all have been around the block. Y'all know everything that's up. You know, and most of the people that would need that advice, there's a very small amount of them watch this channel. But you know, maybe you'll help them out a little bit. Because there was a lot of people who gave me advice, and a good amount of that advice did end up becoming really helpful. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you so much for the compliment, by the way. Because showing maps of Gettysburg, it does help. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Christopher Anderson. Hey, Christopher Anderson. Yes, we UK did have war fatigue, but we UK didn't give up. That's a fact. And that is a fact. In both world wars, the UK just would not give up. And you got to give a lot of credit to the UK. They would go through some insane war fatigue, and they still would end up keeping going on. And that's actually an impressive thing. The stoicism of the British citizenry can never be understated. It's a very steadfast bunch of people that live in the UK, and you got to give them a lot of credit, because even when the fatigue is setting in heavily, they'll keep going on. A real example of a fighting nation and a great national spirit that the UK has historically. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat, the 5th super chat ever from David Long. Hey! And David Long said, couldn't we use the Navy knowledge on Steam to make steam trains, since they use steam for their ships? And then isn't Elon Musk planning to go to the moon? Elon is planning to go to the moon with the Starship program. The Starship program is also slated to go to Mars as well. So that is true. But with the whole steam knowledge thing with ships and trains, it's actually an entirely different application of steam. Steam on naval vessels is interesting. It's incredibly interesting. On some ships, it's steam turbines. Steam turbines are pretty interesting in their own right, but steam turbines don't work on the rails. And also, back in the day before steam turbines existed, and we're talking about like the late 1800s, marine steam engines are completely different in principle and practice from that of most, and I say that with a big asterisk there, most steam locomotives. Steam locomotives operate off of a different locomotion system. They operate usually off of a Walschaerts valve gear or something similar like that. So most of your locomotive, and we'll pull up an American Standard locomotive, because that would be a pretty easy one to show, and everyone will know what they are. So let me go pull up a 440, the American Standard, and let me show y'all one right here. So this would be, let me see here if I can get a really, really good one. We need to go to America. Where is the United States of America? Here we go. So this will be a train everyone knows. This is a 440, the American Standard. And the American Standard was really the first mainstream locomotive in America that really everyone operated. And they're pretty good. I mean, they were really good for their time. But they were completely different than a marine engine or a marine steam engine. You see, the locomotive actually doesn't have that big of an actual motor. Most of the locomotive, the giant round cylinder up here, is the boiler and the smoke box. And also the firebox further back towards the actual operating cab. The entire thing in that area is meant to generate heat, which boils the water inside the boiling vessel, which produces steam, and that steam is then transferred from the actual boiler and into the steam. Well, actually, it's transferred from the steam chest and into the actual valve gears, which are down here, or what would kind of be called pistons. The pistons are these. Let's see here if I can get y'all a good example of a piston. Show y'all a good one. Where the hell are they? Here we go. This is a Finnish locomotive. Still counts. The pistons are these things right here, but they're technically valve gears, and they have a really intricate way of running. But beyond that, they funnel steam into these. And depending on how the steam enters, it ends up revolving the wheels with this giant operating rod. And so that's how a steam engine works. Now, marine engines worked entirely differently, and usually the most common kind of a marine engine that you would have seen around the time that this locomotive existed was this triple expansion steam engine. And let me see if I can go and show y'all one of these here. Hopefully a bigger one. This is a model of a triple expansion steam engine, but this is what a marine engine would have looked like before the bringing about of the steam turbine, which it literally cannot be used on the rails. I'll explain in a bit, but this is the triple expansion steam engine, or the marine engine, and these are completely different than how a locomotive works, because a ship actually has multiple boilers, and all of those boilers are producing steam for this engine, or the multiple engines that would be in a ship like this one. And the steam will enter the first cylinder, which is usually smaller, and because the steam is entering at such a high pressure at that point, and while the cylinder is smaller, it actually ends up producing the same amount of torque and everything that the larger cylinders further down work. The steam is then recycled. It's pushed from the cylinder on the return crank upwards of the piston and into the second cylinder, which is a little bit larger than the first one, but not by much. And it recycles the steam used in the first one to move this piston as well. And once that one is moved and the crank returns back up and the piston starts to compress the atmosphere inside the cylinder, it then moves to the largest cylinder, which is the third one. And this is the last one that the steam is being recycled in. This cylinder is massive because at this point, with the steam going through 2 revolutions in the engine, it's lost most of its pressure. So to be able to get the same kind of torque, you have to have a massive cylinder operating off of a very low steam pressure to be able to get it. So that's why that one is that big. And then once that is used, usually the water ends up being recycled in some way from the third cylinder and then refed back into the ship, because you can't use salt water. Salt water is way too corrosive for these engines, so you have to find some way to desalinate the water, or you end up having to recycle most of the water that you can to be able to run the vessel. So it's a very intricate and complicated system on a marine steam engine, like a triple expansion, compared to that of a steam locomotive. It's actually a lot simpler. And so going off of that, you really can't apply the same kind of technology and knowledge from marine steam and then put it into railroading steam, because it's a very different kind of mechanical operating principle. So that's why the technology is kind of lost, actually, in the steam locomotive world, and even in the marine engine world. Sometimes that technology and knowledge can be lost a little bit. So with that, I hope that does. Also, let me address the whole steam turbine thing, since I didn't. Steam turbines are massive, and the reason why they did not work on the railroads is because they're too mechanically complicated for the grime that a steam engine would experience. Running a locomotive, especially a steam locomotive, is an incredibly dirty process, and steam turbines are very fine-tuned sorts of machines, and the kind of grime and filth that a steam locomotive would run into operating on the railroads would actually end up gunking up the steam turbines and leading them to break down a lot. They actually tried to introduce steam turbines to the rails. Probably the most successful but still failed example is the John Henry, which was run by the Norfolk and Western, which technically by all measurements was the biggest steam locomotive ever made. It had the largest amount of tractive effort. It had the largest length. It was the heaviest. In every single way, this thing was the biggest steam locomotive to ever run in the world in history. But it was failed. It was terrible idea. It kind of ran like an electromotive diesel, because the steam turbine would produce electricity for prime movers on both ends of the locomotive to be able to move it. But still, the steam turbine would get gunked up a lot. It was very expensive to maintain these things. They really didn't work that well, so they ended up being scrapped. On top of that, the other problem is they can't really reverse. Steam turbines really only run in one direction. You can't really make them run bi-directional. So to be able to reverse the locomotive, you couldn't, unless if you went and built another steam turbine that was facing the completely opposite direction. So this ended up being completely unviable, really, for most intents and purposes. And so the whole steam turbine thing on the rails didn't work. So that technology is not transferable from ships to the rails. And so I hope that does address that very, very well. At least the best I can, David Long, because that's a very interesting question, and I hope that that's about my best answer I could give as to why the technology isn't transferable from marine steam to railroad steam. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And moving on from that, we actually have a find from Neil Visanon, and Neil said, "Now I got to do it. T-tips. YouTube doesn't like the T word," and I don't know what the T word is. And I see people guessing. I don't really have a lot of tips for that, because I don't know. I really don't know how a lot of that works on the codes. I just go through and input the exact info they're looking for and pay exactly what the IRS says I pay. I don't really know a lot about the loopholes or the workarounds or anything like that. That would mostly be up to an accountant. And tax laws change a lot, so you really have to be up to date and really paying attention a lot to that to know how it works. So I hope that does address that somewhat well, because I can give you advice and tips on everything else and a little bit of information, but on that is truly an enigma to me. I don't really know how the taxes side of things work that much. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, let's see, what about nuclear electric generator powering electric trains? Interesting question, Adam. Largely, the best way to run electric trains is not to put, if we're talking about efficiency purposes, is not to put the actual generator into the locomotive. It's actually to just have a power plant connected by catenary to the rails and then put electric locomotives onto the rails. That actually is probably the best way to do it, in all honesty. At least to me, I think that's a lot more efficient. But, you know, of course, in America, we actually have a lot of electromotive diesels. That's really all we have in most areas in the United States. It's not bad, but it's not the most efficient thing you'll see either. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel keep it running. And a big shout out to DJ Waffle, who threw in a 5 and said, "Greetings all, Slava Ukraini." And thank you so much once again, and greetings to you all, and of course, Slava Ukraini, and thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Wyatt Logan. Hey! And Wyatt said, "This last week was weird. I had a hard time sleeping without hearing your guys' voices. Glad you're back. Even Chris's mom missed you. LOL, and long live the LSA, and long live the LSA." And I gotta thank you so much for the massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And I gotta say, it was weird, actually, not being on the stream. I'll have to agree. It was really weird, even for me. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And of course, if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so, a massive thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And of course, long live the Lee Spring Army, and a good Christmas mom joke on top of that. And we have a $2 super chat from Cat Chaser without a comment. Big thanks for the support. And we also have a 2 from Neil Vizinon. And Neil said, "Are Russian law enforcement a legit military target?" Well, technically, they are paramilitary forces in the Russian Federation, so yes, they are targets. And also, that kind of applies for the Ukrainians as well. The Ukrainian police are a paramilitary force, so they do qualify as viable military targets for the Russians to attack. So really, on both sides, the police can be attacked as military targets, because they are both technically paramilitary forces and not civilian law enforcement. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And moving on to the next one, we got a first super chat ever from Thomas Flannery. And he put in a laughing lemon. That's an interesting thing. And I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you, Thomas, that help to make this channel possible and help us to keep this thing running. And if it wasn't for folks like you, well, you wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and help us to keep this thing running. And so, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Hey Hate Me 2014. And Hey Hate Me 2014 said, "Is the vacation over? Oh, you're all back?" And yes, we are. Unlimited Soup and Salad is back, and we're going to be back running the show 6 days a week, like we were before we left, every single day. And so, a huge thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the last super chat of this segment, which is from Elka Sir. And a huge shout out to Elka Sir. And Elka Sir said, "Would bombers be outfitted to deploy FPV drones?" That is an interesting idea. I think that's very similar to the Rapid Dragon in principle, but a lot smaller in terms of what's being delivered. But yes, I think that bombers of the future, maybe even missile delivery systems, could end up dropping off a lot of automated drones that have pre-input GPS coordinates inside of them. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing a reality, and we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. And so with that, we have actually reached all of the super chats. We've actually read all of them, and we're now going to be moving on into the Morse code message, which sadly we actually appear to not have tonight according to the spreadsheet. So that's interesting, but perfectly fine. And moving on from that, due to time constraints, I'm going to get 3 live chat questions, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. And so with that, we are on to the first live chat, which is from Monturn. And Monturn said, have you heard that China told Russia that they are not to use nukes, or that China will distance themselves further from Russia? We have heard that as a rumor in the background. We don't know the validity to the claim, because they always say that this is behind closed doors, and if it was, we actually have no clue if that actually happened or not. But we would assume that the Chinese probably are making claims like this, because using nuclear weapons is incredibly escalatory and very dangerous. And generally, China would not want to see such a dangerous thing happening, as it could threaten the Chinese directly, even if they aren't involved at all. And so it probably is happening, and so I would say I'd largely believe those claims. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to another super chat, which is actually from Hot So, who threw in a €6 and put in a lady throwing out a wink and a nod, and it says, "You're the one." And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for the first super chat ever at helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help this channel to keep on running and help to make this thing possible. And so a big thanks to you once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, and we are on to the second to last question of the night. Also, Paul Schultz, I am waiting for that Morse code message if you have it, and we will make sure to read it off when it comes in. But the second to last question of the night goes to Adam McLean, and Adam McLean said, "What do you guys know about the cardboard drones Ukraine is getting from Australia?" Fun stuff. They've been getting them for a while now. We don't know how they're using them or where, because we don't really get a lot of video footage of that, but they are cardboard drones that are wildly cheap, and they carry a very small warhead from what I remember. They're pretty efficient, at least cost-wise. We don't know how efficient they are in actually making it to their target, but they are pretty cool. That's about all I can say about them at the moment, Adam McLean, because we don't really know much how that really goes. I mean, honestly, like with the efficiency side and everything, I just know that they're made of cardboard, they have a small warhead, and they are pretty neat. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night was Anthony Reddle. And Anthony said, "What is your feeling on Russian manpower? How many soldiers can they keep sending to the front?" Technically, they can keep sending them for a while. They can win in the manpower game, but it's not going to be forever. It's going to end up running out eventually. And I would have to say, they might be able to keep up the kind of losses that they have right now for about another 2.5 years or 3 years. Because while they are taking insanely high losses, they do have a pretty high population compared to Ukraine. So they can just keep throwing them into the grinder, especially if they fully mobilize and there isn't that much backlash to it. And they can keep this thing going for quite some time. So I would have to say maybe about 3 years on the manpower side of things. But in other categories, they may end up running short much quicker. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, Neil Viznon threw in the final super chat of the night and said, "Pimp Marmot, and you know it! We ain't get that Pimp Marmot, baby!" And here we go. What's up, bitches? Hey! It's the Pimp Marmot, and we love to see the Pimp Marmot. Oh, hello there, Governor. Would you like a rock? Or would you like what you want, Governor? And also, oh man, I went on a date and it went terribly. Oh man, it was horrendous. Oh man. And I gotta say, I hope y'all enjoyed the Pimp Marmot right there. And that rounds out tonight's stream. I gotta thank you all so much once again for watching. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to cover the news for all of y'all on the 940th day of the war. So far tonight, at the peak, there was 8.8 thousand people here, and 66,000 people have watched the stream before it rounded out. We are entirely honored, grateful, and appreciative that all of y'all continue to watch this stream and enjoy it, and I hope that y'all really enjoyed it tonight. If y'all did, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment. It means a lot to us. It always makes us happy to know that people are enjoying the channel and really supporting it. And we will be back tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. this?
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.